Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto is a war veteran time travel. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by cywsaphyre and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1 to live again. Hoarse coughs disrupted the heavy surroundings as dying flames crackled quietly across the corpse-littered ground. A body stirred amongst the rubble and ash as one bloodied hand reached up to sweep aside dirtied locks of blonde hair. Is he dead, Kurama? The demon fox's voice was faint when the answer came. As dead as he possibly can be, kid. Even his body's been completely destroyed. A pause followed for several heartbeats. But we're not far behind either. A dry half-chuckle was offered at this statement as Naruto heaved himself into a sitting position, ignoring the blood that dripped from his wounds and joined the dark crimson already staining the battlefield. No doubt. I can practically feel our chakra leaking away. Can't believe how strong that bastard is. The fox didn't reply, and under normal circumstances, Naruto would have been worried that the demon merged with him, now found it too exhausting to even speak. Instead, the blonde turned dull blue eyes to the broken figure lying only a few feet away, a hole in his chest, limbs twisted in an ugly rendition of a ragdoll. Naruto released a bitter scoff at this, too drained to even consider crying for his fallen best friend. He hadn't cried since his godfather had died. The irony here was painful. Once upon a time, he had been the one struck down like this, almost killed by the very attack that Madara had slaughtered Sasuke with not even an hour ago. And the Chidori hadn't even been aimed at the raven-haired Anbu general in the first place. His stupidly proud, unbelievably protective brilliant best friend had jumped in the way at the last second. Hey kid. Naruto blinked slowly, pulling his wayward thoughts back together as the Kyuubi's soft, almost wavering voice thrummed in his mind. What is it? What do you think you're doing? The blonde frowned, dragging himself over to some leftover debris to lean against a slab of fallen rock. He doubted he could stand anymore. What does it look like? There's nothing left. Konoha's gone. Madara's gone. Not much left to do but wait until I go too. A feeble snort batted at him, somehow managing to convey the same amount of annoyance the Kyuubi once did at full strength. That's a pathetic way to die. And I for one am not going to just roll over and wait until death takes us like some common dog. Naruto would have rolled his eyes if he had the energy left to do so. Don't think we have much choice, Kurama. Unless you want me to commit traditional suicide. The growl berated him. Think, you damn brat. Last time I checked, you were a Fuinjutsu master. What were you working on after that pervert of a Sannin was killed? Naruto blinked, mind sluggishly retrieving the memory of a complex seal he had started on after Jiraiya had died. In his grief, he had holed himself up in his apartment and had gone through stacks of paper and numerous jars of ink in a half-crazed attempt at traversing the event of the Toad Sannin's death. It had been a stupid thing to do and he had always known, in the back of his mind, that he would never go through with it. One man's death, no matter how precious to him, was not worth erasing his other friends' futures. He had put it aside after a week and a furious beatdown from a subtly panicking Sasuke once the Uchiha had managed to break through his seals and into his apartment. But now, what was there to lose? I have no paper, no ink, he thought stupidly, even as he cleared a rough patch of ground in front of him. And it takes a huge amount of chakra. And it might not even work. You have blood, Kit. And we still have enough chakra to pull this off if we pour everything we have into it. I'll be damned if you won't at least try. We have nothing to lose anymore. Focusing now on the seal he had come up with years ago seemed to lift the haze fogging his mind. Naruto held no doubts that it was mostly a last rush of adrenaline that forced him to concentrate even as his life continued to slip away like sand through spread fingers. But his hand was steady as he drew out the seal in his own blood. He only paused when he started drawing the time frame of the jump. Originally, he had drawn it out to be before Nagato's attack on the Toad Sannin, but if he was going to travel back, he might as well do it properly. Kurama, how many years do you think we can jump? A decade, maybe a little more than that, the fox responded after a considering pause. And it would be easier if you jumped back to a significant point in time. Significant to you, I mean. Naruto remained still. The day of the Kyuubi attack was out of the question. That had been a significant date and he had played a large part in it, but he had also just been a baby. There was no way he could jump back so far to a time he couldn't even remember. The Uchiha massacre was also impossible. As much as he wished to spare his best friend the loss of his family, he hadn't known Sasuke back then, and the Uchiha clan's destruction had never affected him directly. The best date to jump back to would probably be the day he had been assigned to Team 7. It had been one of the happiest days of his life and had occurred before everything had gone downhill. A choice Kurama approved. It will take every last drop of chakra we have, but that is a strong point in time. It will serve as an anchor for us. Naruto nodded absently and quickly drew out the correct symbols before finishing the rest of the seal. His hand dropped back into his lap, studying the seal with a critical eye for any mistakes. Kurama, where will I end up once I get back? My apartment. On the streets of Konoha. He frowned. In my 12-year-old body? I can't do anything like that. The demon fox was quiet for a long moment, the silence contemplative. You will most likely still have your own body, the Kyuubi admitted eventually. Seals this strong consist of symbols, chakra, and the user's own desires. You wish for the ability to save your friends and family, as well as the village you call home. To do so, you would need the knowledge of this future and the abilities you have gained along the way. But to retain the self, you risk a paradox where there will be two Uzumaki Narutos running around in the same timeline. That should not be possible. It should not happen at all. But it will happen, Naruto thought back fiercely. I am going to change it all. Yes, kid, I understand that, Kurama replied with a surprising amount of patience. And your desire to prevent another war of this magnitude and the eventual deaths of everyone around, you will be strong enough to keep the paradox at bay. But it will not last forever. Your ultimate goal is Uchiha Madara. The things you change along the way will either help you towards this goal or simply hasten the inevitability of the same thing happening once again. Time is as rigid as it is flexible. You could prove to be strong enough to end up creating a completely different timeline, or prove too weak and end up with the same results. Time does not like being tampered with. But whichever outcome you end up with, it does not change the fact that you do not belong in that timeline. When your job is done, for better or for worse, you will simply cease to exist. As to where you will end up, that I do not know. Naruto had remained almost unresponsive throughout this entire explanation. Now he sighed, the movement causing a wave of agony to his already damaged lungs. I don't think I really mind, he thought detachedly. I've lived long enough. The only reason I want to go back is because this could be a chance to give everyone a different future. A better one. But if I am to disappear, you will disappear with me. I thought you wanted to live. The derisive scoff echoed in his mind as the Kyuubi shifted irritably. Only fools and cowards wish to live forever, and I am neither nor both. I simply do not wish to die due to a murder-suicide, and at the hands of Uchiha Madara no less. At this moment in time, we have accomplished nothing more than ridding a broken world of a madman. When I finally leave this plane of existence for the next to meet my maker, so to speak, I would like a little more than murder to my name. And since those higher beings up there seem hopelessly enamored with such pathetically weak humans such as yourself, preventing the apocalypse from wiping out your pitiful kind would be excellent fodder to throw back into their faces. Amusement stirred in Naruto's chest as the insults flew past him without harm. He was far too used to the Kyuubi reiterating his stance on humans to care. You don't seem to like those higher beings very much. I don't. They place 9 demons in a world where much weaker creatures roam and give us unlimited power, only to condemn us to an imprisoned life in a human container because we brought destruction to those who sought to destroy us. There is neither logic nor intelligence in their decision. No doubt, once I pass on, they will try to condemn me for said destruction. A dark smile curved the fox's mouth. But with this, I shall be ready to face them. Naruto just shook his head. He had never asked Kurama about any of the higher beings on high, simply because he had no interest in them. As far as he was concerned, he carved his own path in life, and he would deal with any judgment dealt to him when the time came. Alright then. Are you ready? Immediately, the demon fox settled down, and the Kyuubi's red chakra rose to the surface along with his own. Naruto focused on the seal, one hand pressing over it as he concentrated on that fateful spring day 14 years ago when he had finally made genin. Chakra flared around him, and the seal flared up under his hand. Gritting his teeth, he forced as much chakra as he possibly could into the seal, ignoring the immediate warning bells that told him when he was at his limit. This technique would take everything he had. All around him, the world exploded into a blinding landscape of white, the very air around him trembling with energy. An invisible force seemed to close around him, and Naruto only had a moment to wonder, distantly, whether or not he would end up arrested and in a prison cell before the day was up. And then, with a deafening roaring ringing in his ears that Naruto instinctively knew to be the rush of time, darkness engulfed him and he knew no more. XXX. Kit, wake up. You lazy midget-sized pathetic excuse for a midday snack. Wake up this instant. Blue eyes snapped open and Naruto jerked up, almost banging his head against a low-hanging branch. With a low groan, the blonde's hands reached up to clutch at his head as a jackhammer set off inside his skull. God damn it, you stupid fox. I'm awake. What do you want? The snort, and Naruto could almost see Kurama stretching smugly in his mindscape. We're back, kid. Just thought you want to get a move on. You've been out for 3 hours. I was getting bored. Naruto would have shot something derogatory back at the demon if he hadn't been caught up in the fact that he was back. Because he knew this forest, knew it like the back of his hand. He was at the very edges of the forest of death in the shadows of one of the trees, and from his position, he could see the rest of Konoha, real and bustling with life spread out before him. "Kurama, we did it." Another snort, this one more of fond amusement than anything else, sounded in his mind. "Yes kid, that's what I said. And it seems your wounds have disappeared. You have the scars to prove it, of course, not to mention that your clothes are abysmal, but your chakra reserves are almost back to normal, and I feel better than I have in a long time." Naruto couldn't quite help the small grin that tilted his lips as he staggered to his feet, tugging absently at the torn clothing that hung off his thin frame. He hadn't felt happy in a long time, and it had been even longer since he had shown it openly, but this was it. This could be everything he had ever wanted, and the best part was that his younger self could grow up, ascend the ranks, and become Hokage without half as much suffering as he had gone through. This time, Uzumaki Naruto would have his friends around him, supporting him, and there would be no war to take away the millions of lives that had been lost in that other timeline. "What will you do first?" Naruto blinked, frowning thoughtfully as his eyes drank in his village. The old man. "At least one person will have to know who I am. And I still have Bachan's necklace to show him. He's reasonable. I'll be able to convince him." The fox made a sound of agreement. "Go on then. I'm going to sleep. Try not to get killed between here and the Hokage tower. If anyone could, it would be you." Naruto rolled his eyes before performing a henge. His blonde hair faded to normal brown, blue eyes quickly turned brown as well, and his clothes matched those of an everyday civilian. His henge was also a few inches shorter, but his frame was the same slender build. All in all, he looked harmless and nondescript. Still, Naruto hurried along the streets of Konoha, not lingering as he hurried towards the Hokage tower. He would not be able to get in like everyone else, as he had no identification on himself, but his gaze flitted to the open window of the Hokage's office, his eyes quickly pinpointing the small squad of Anbu on guard duty at the moment. Casually, he turned left, putting him parallel to his destination, even as he disappeared from the Anbu guard's line of sight. And then, with a quick half step to turn back towards the tower, Naruto pushed off from the ground, flashing past the guards and through the open window, before coming to a halt in front of a startled Sarutobi Hiruzen. It was so easy that it would have been funny if Naruto didn't know this also meant that if he had been an enemy, the third Hokage would have been dead before anyone could have reacted. Speaking of reaction, Naruto already had his arms in the air in the universal sign of surrender, as Anbu rushed towards him, kunai extended and pointed at him. Sarutobi had risen to his feet, eyes narrowed at him, body tense as his sharp gaze assessed the intruder. "Hokage-sama," Naruto started formally. "I mean you no harm, but I have something of great importance to speak to you about. If you would allow me to show you something, I would ask you to consider granting me a private audience with yourself." The Sandame stared hard at the brown-haired man, observing the now obvious henge. This man, obviously a ninja, had entered his office before any of his Anbu had even been able to react and then had stood still while his guards had surrounded him. If he had meant any actual or immediate harm, this man could have already done it. Wordlessly, Sarutobi nodded curtly, keeping his eyes on the man, as one of the ninja's hands slowly reached into a hidden pocket and withdrew a necklace. Sarutobi immediately stiffened, recognizing the necklace instantly. "Where did you get that?" he demanded as he came around his desk and contemplated whether or not the man would give it up without fuss. The henge nin held out the necklace without hesitation. "From a slug currently on quite the losing streak." Sarutobi's eyes widened at the analogy, and he studied the brown eyes for a moment longer. This man knew Tsunade, and while an enemy nin could just as easily have gotten this information, he also knew his former student would never give up this necklace to some random shinobi. With a decisive nod, he turned to his Anbu guards. "Wait outside," he ordered, ignoring the silent protest that immediately flared up. "Go. I can handle this." Reluctantly, the Anbu withdrew, and once they had left the office, Sarutobi quickly activated the privacy seals set up around the room. He turned back to the stranger, blinking in shock as the henge dropped and a tall, slender-framed blonde with piercing blue eyes stared back at him, a puzzling sort of affection tilting his lips. "Minato," Sarutobi whispered, taking a shaky step back. The blonde sighed, brushing a stray lock of hair away from his face. "Not quite, old man. Try his son. I'm Naruto." The Sandame quickly pulled his thoughts together, steadying himself in the present as he studied the man in front of him. Now that he took the time, he could see the differences between the yandame and this blonde. While the two had the same hair and eyes, this man, Naruto, was more slender than and not as broad-shouldered as Minato had been. His jawline and facial structure were deceivingly delicate but also held the same strength Minato had had. And the faint smile that still quirked the blonde's lips as the man waited patiently for him to finish his observations was all Kushina. Absently, Sarutobi wondered if his laugh would be like Minato's. "If what you say is true," Sarutobi finally voiced carefully, "then you must be from the future." Naruto nodded, the slightest flicker of relief flitting across his features. Yes, 14 years in the future to be exact, give or take a few months. Here, the blonde hesitated before forging on. You could ask me some questions to make sure. Sarutobi didn't think anyone could pull off this sort of hinge, and not many people knew Minato and Kushina even had a son, not to mention that the whisker markings on the blonde's face and the distinct Kyuubi chakra he could now sense inside the younger man were dead giveaways, but a few identity questions couldn't hurt either. Who were your parents? Again, that faint smile appeared briefly, and Sarutobi frowned inwardly at this implication. Naruto had always been optimistic and always had a ready smile for all. For his expressions to have faded to a mere shadow of what it once was, still is now, was a clear indication that things in the future had not turned out well. Namikaze Minato and Uzumaki Kushina. Sarutobi nodded. Your godfather and godmother? This time, a shadow of pain and deep sorrow darkened the cerulean eyes before that too disappeared. Raya and Tsunade. Sarutobi blinked, startled. He lets you call him Raya. Naruto, for it really could be no one else, blinked back. Well, I also called him Iro-senin, but after I did that a couple of times in front of those women he tries to get to as well as a few dignitaries, he finally told me I could call him Raya instead, at least while in front of other people. The blonde scoffed a bit. There's nothing wrong with Raya. It's not perverted or degrading or anything. It's just a nickname. If he hadn't told me that he didn't let anyone else call him that, I would have ignored him altogether. Sarutobi chuckled, finally relaxing entirely. I used to call him that, but he insisted on his full name after he turned 15. He thought the name sounded too female, and I believed Tsunade somehow teased him enough when they were younger that Jiraiya now has the irrational impression that the name is a patronizing insult to his sense of self. Or something of that sort anyway. He paused before continuing softly, you two must have been very close. The blue gaze darkened once again even as the blonde nodded curtly. Yes. Sarutobi nodded and made no further comment on the matter, instead taking in the ripped clothing the ninja was wearing. Very well. I believe who you are. Now, why have you come back? Are things really that bad in the future? Naruto closed his eyes briefly before nodding. Konoha is gone, he said simply even as Sarutobi frowned at this revelation. Razed to the ground. Its civilians and shinobi all dead. I was the last. For a moment, Sarutobi couldn't breathe as he tried to imagine a world where Konoha no longer existed. He glanced at the window towards the rest of the village before looking back at the blonde. It wasn't just the inner strength that was so like Minato, Sarutobi realized, because Kushina had had that strength as well. It was Naruto's entire bearing that reminded him most of Konoha's yellow flash. This man currently standing in front of him, frame relaxed but ready, had the air of a cage, and a powerful one at that. The kind of power that Sarutobi had only ever seen Minato exude. You became Hokage then, Sarutobi couldn't help but inquire. Naruto inclined his head in affirmation. Rakudame Hokage. The haunted look passed over the blonde's features once more. Just in time to watch my village burn. Sarutobi almost shuddered at the near overwhelming grief in the younger man's voice. It was always hardest on the cage when their people's lives were lost. The entire village was their responsibility after all. I came back to change it, Naruto suddenly looked almost anxious, and Sarutobi found himself relieved as he caught a glimpse of the Naruto he knew in this time. The Sandaime nodded briskly, turning to step back behind his desk. Of course. If Konoha will fall then we will have to find a way to prevent it. But not now. Can I assume that nothing drastic will happen in the immediate future? Naruto frowned in confusion but nodded nonetheless. Everything will start going downhill at the next Chunin exams. Before that, as long as I keep an eye on things and root out some spies, things should be alright. Good. Sarutobi pulled out a list of empty apartments and sent a reassuring look when Naruto stared in bewilderment at his assessment. If nothing will happen anytime soon, I would like to get you settled in. You look ready to keel over, Naruto. The blonde blinked before looking down at himself. Oh. I just finished fighting Ma. Sarutobi put up a hand to halt the younger man's explanation. Not now Naruto. He chided gently. No doubt if you continue, I will have many questions for you and we will be in here for another few hours. Right now, you need rest, not to mention we still have to create a background for you. Naruto seemed to consider this for a moment before nodding silently in agreement. Very well. While you are here, you will need to use a different name. Do you have one in mind? Izama Haruki, Naruto said after a moment's thought. That's the name I used when I infiltrated Iwagakure. Sarutobi opened his mouth to ask before shaking his head ruefully. Questions later. But who knew Naruto had the potential to be a spy? Alright, he continued on. I'll write up the necessary papers and tell anyone who asks that you've been on a mission for me for the past 8 years. We can use the Hyuga affair, you know what that is? Good. We can use that and say you've been in Kumo to make sure they wouldn't try anything again. They won't try anything again, will they? Naruto shook his head. They won't be stealing any more Hyugas anyway. But the council will want proof. Sarutobi frowned. Indeed. Is there any knowledge from the future that you can use here? Naruto stayed silent, gaze flickering over to the window to stare absently out at the sky. How long can you keep the council at bay before they start asking questions? Sarutobi shrugged. As long as you keep a low profile, word won't get back to them too quickly, but even if it does, I can hold them off for several days, maybe a week. Naruto nodded. Alright. Give me 5 days. I can get to Kumo and back within that time. And I'll bring back Hyuga Hisaashi's body. The bastards preserved it so I'll still be able to present an actual body. If Sarutobi had been anything other than a cage, he would have gaped. Wouldn't they keep that well guarded? Naruto shrugged. I can do it, old man. I'm above Anbu level, plus I've done it before. And I'll leave a body clone behind so they won't notice. As long as the Hyuga clan doesn't go flaunting it through the streets of Kumo, everything should be fine. The Sandaime considered this for a few seconds before nodding in agreement. Alright, I'll call a council meeting when you get back. You leave tomorrow? The blonde nodded. And I'll be back in 5 days. Good. Now for your looks. The village will be in an uproar if they get a good look at you. At first, and maybe even second and third glance, you look very much like Minato. Naruto frowned thoughtfully before performing a few one-handed seals. His long golden locks immediately washed away, leaving a crimson fire in its wake. The new Redeed cocked a questioning eyebrow at the surprised Sandaime. Sarutobi smiled and nodded approvingly. While there were still traces of both Minato and Kushina on the former blonde's features, anyone would just dismiss it as a coincidence if they noticed. He couldn't detect the henge either. Moving on to where you will be staying then. I'll take the apartment next to my younger counterpart. Sarutobi blinked. How did you oh? Right. Are you sure? Very. This way, I'll be able to keep an eye on him. Keep him company too. He'll get lonely sometimes. The Sandaime frowned sadly but said nothing. He had a feeling this Naruto wouldn't appreciate it. Very well. Just show these papers to the landlady there and she'll give you the keys. He smiled warmly at the Redeed. This Naruto exuded a quiet strength and seemed comfortable in his own skin. He had grown up well. Get some rest, Naruto. Naruto offered that faint half-smile again before tucking Tsunade's necklace away and withdrawing a small paper seal instead, extending it toward Sarutobi. The Sandaime blinked, taking the seal and noting the complex design. Just press it against any piece of clothing you wear and it will automatically imprint itself onto the material, Naruto explained quietly. If you are ever in trouble, sending even a drop of your chakra into the seal will automatically inform me of your position and I will be able to step to your location in an instant. Sarutobi examined the seal curiously before pressing it to his cage cloak's inside collar. A flash of chakra and the ink on the paper dissolved, reappearing on the cloak instead. What does it do? This time, Naruto's smile held the faintest traces of mischief and Sarutobi found himself hard-pressed not to smile back in the face of such familiarity. Try it. Reaching up, Sarutobi sent a small current of chakra into the seal and then almost stepped back when Naruto appeared beside him, a quiet crackle of dry lightning as his only warning. Wide-eyed, Sarutobi stared between the spot the Redeed had been and the spot where he was now standing. Hiraishin. Naruto was already shaking his head. One of my own actually, although it is based on the Hiraishin. I call it Raikou Hitakiri no Jutsu. Same concept but less, well, like my dad's I suppose. Enemies rarely see it coming. The seal helps me lock onto the location, but if I have a very clear picture of where I'm going in my head when I perform the jutsu, I can get there just as easily. Sarutobi was speechless for several seconds. While he knew that this Naruto was essentially an adult version of the 12-year-old Naruto, it was still hard to connect the two. To think that Naruto would one day grow up to create his own jutsu sent a thrum of pride rushing through the Sandaime. This is amazing. The younger man seemed to brighten a little, blue eyes glowing with momentary pride at the compliment. Thanks old man. Sarutobi nodded before making a shooing motion at the Redeed. Alright, go on then. We'll figure everything else out later. Get some sleep. And, he reached into one drawer and withdrew a wallet, deactivating the seal with a flick of his hand before offering several bills. Buy some clothes and food. That should be enough for a month and then you can start doing missions to earn your own money. Naruto eyed the bills before accepting them with a nod of thanks. I'll pay you back, old man. Sarutobi would have refused if he wasn't certain Naruto would be stubborn about it. So he simply nodded in acknowledgement, deactivating the privacy seals as Naruto, now Haruki, sketched a simple salute before jumping out the window and disappearing over the rooftops within seconds. Hokage-sama. Sarutobi glanced absently at his bodyguards as they slipped back into the office. He waved a dismissive hand in the air as he sat back down and started on a new stack of paperwork. One of my spies. He had to pull out quite suddenly though, so I was not expecting him. I sent him out a long time ago and haven't seen him in a while. He was also under a henge and it took me a moment to realize who he was. Now I better start on this. I swear, the paperwork grows every time I turn around. The Anbu on guard duty seemed to accept this easily enough as they relaxed and moved back into the shadows again, some almost palpably amused at Saratobi's grumbling. But even as he started scanning a request for new medical equipment at the hospital, Saratobi contemplated the few things he had learned in the last 20 minutes. Dark times lay ahead, waiting in shadowed corners. But perhaps, with the time traveler's help, a man who seemed both familiar and foreign to him at the moment, they would somehow manage. They would have to. Chapter 2 Mission to Kumo. Sasuke. He fell back, horror twisting his heart as a familiar figure shoved him away, darting in front of the oncoming Chidori. Sasuke, no. Move. The raven-haired general glanced back a heartbeat before the attack struck, a smirk playing on the man's lips, even as Sharingan eyes met cerulean. And then blue-white lightning seemed to explode in front of them, engulfing the Uchiha as Madara's hand thrust clean through Sasuke's chest. Streaks of lightning spread outward like snakes, wrapping around arms and legs and twisting them to awkward angles. Through it all, he stayed frozen to the ground, breath frozen in his lungs as the lightning died and a broken body tilted backwards. He barely managed to pull enough brain cells together to catch the dead weight before the general hit the ground. Sasuke. His eyes drifted to the gaping bloody hole in the Uchiha's chest, seeing the damning injury and smelling the sickening scent of burned flesh but not comprehending. This was Sasuke, his teammate, his rival, his best friend, his brother, and this was not supposed to happen. Don't you dare, shocked blue eyes flickered back up to meet dull onyx, the light inside them fading fast, even as the Uchiha's gaze clung desperately to his. Don't you dare, Sasuke rasped again, crimson spilling from his mouth and staining his lips. Let him win. Naruto. And then he was gone, black eyes becoming sightless as the last spark of life spluttered and died, his entire body turning slack. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't hear anything as he strained his ears in vain to catch the telltale breaths from the prone figure he was crouching over, save for the harsh raucous laughter of the man standing only steps away from them. He's gone now too, Naruto-kun. Another one you led to his death. Another one you killed. When will you learn your lesson? It is futile to stand against me. This one's last of your pawns too, is he not? Or do you have another one to sacri? In the next moment, all he could hear was screaming, and he barely registered that the agonized sound splitting the air were coming from his own throat as he hurtled at the mocking figure with a vengeance, insanity threatening to conquer his mind. Yet still he could hear the sound of mad laughter, cutting into him with terrifying accuracy, because Madara was right, it was his fault again, and once more he had lost another of his precious people, lost the last of whom he had sworn to protect. With a choked-off cry, Haruki shot up in his bed, momentarily disoriented and drenched in sweat as he gasped for breath. One shaky hand reached up to cover his eyes, mentally pushing the most recent of his former life's memories back. Sasuke had been the last of his friends to go, loyal and unwavering to the very end. That Sasuke was gone now, the one with whom he could banter with and spar with and be Naruto with, not Hokage, but there was another Sasuke he could still save, one that he now had a chance of giving a better life to. Breathing finally steadying, Haruki lowered his hand, dropping it back into his lap as he glanced at the plastic clock he had bought yesterday. 5:10 a.m. stared back at him and the Redeed could only sigh as he tossed back the blankets and got out of bed. 3 hours of sleep was actually pretty good in his book, so he wasn't complaining. A quick shower and a cup of ramen later and Haruki was on his way out the door, whisker markings hidden behind a henge and his new weapons concealed on his body. He had gone on a shopping spree yesterday and had even managed to find a lightweight katana, one with an indigo hilt and a blade of tamahagane so strong that a hint shimmering blue flashed across the blade when wielded properly. The katana could channel elemental chakra, which was perfect for Haruki because most of his attacks with his old katana consisted of combining chakra with a sword. Haruki had bought it at Tenten's family store and while he hadn't seen the future weapons mistress, he had shaken hands with her father. The man had recommended this katana after listening to Haruki's detailed description of his former blade. Locking his apartment door behind him, Haruki turned in the direction of the village's front gates, only to stop and blink in mild surprise when he caught sight of familiar blue eyes staring inquisitively back up at him. "Good morning," Haruki greeted his younger counterpart after a short contemplative moment. While he was now living next door to the 12-year-old, he hadn't expected to have to interact with him until after he got back from Kumo. "I believe I'm your new neighbor, Kazama Haruki. Nice to meet you." This seemed to snap the boy out of whatever fascinated trance he had been in. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto." The blonde chirped brightly, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty that Haruki easily detected, recognizing it from his own childhood whenever he had to force aside the fear of being rejected and hated so he could introduce himself. "You're living next to me now." Haruki offered a faint half-smile to the genin. Yes. I just got back from a long-term mission. Naruto frowned, eyes narrowing in suspicion. So you had to get a new apartment. It was an 8-year-long mission, Haruki clarified, suppressing another smile at the odd expression that spread across the blonde's face. Had he really been this open when he was a child? Having to keep up the rent on my old place would have been a waste of money, so I had to find a different place to live in now that I'm back. You must be really good for the old man to give you such a long mission. Naruto exclaimed, eyes lighting up with excitement. And you're living next to me. The blonde fell silent for a moment as he eyed Haruki's ninja garb. Are you going on another mission already? Haruki nodded, slipping his hands into the jounin vest he was currently wearing. An Anbu had dropped off both the vest and a brand new hit I ate last night. Yes, but it's a top secret mission and I'll be back in 5 days, so don't tell anyone, okay? If there was one thing Haruki knew his current self and his younger self would always share, it was the adamant refusal to break their word. When Naruto nodded seriously, Haruki knew the younger boy would take the information to his grave. With a satisfied nod, Haruki checked the sky, noting the rising sun before turning back to Naruto. I still have some time before I have to leave. Have you had breakfast yet? We could go get some ramen or something. As expected, Naruto immediately brightened at the mention of ramen, but deflated again almost immediately. I can't. I have to meet my new team at 6 for our test to become genin, and our sensei told us not to eat anything. Haruki considered this thoughtfully. Really, looking back, Kakashi could have at least let them eat, especially when the man was going to be late. Who is your sensei? Pada Kakashi. Naruto made a face. He's kinda weird. Haruki found himself grinning a little at this. Ah, I've heard of him. He's famous for being late to everything by at least 2 hours. You must have met him yesterday. Was he late? Naruto's eyes widened as he nodded vigorously. Yeah, he was over 3 hours late. Haruki's sweat dropped. He had forgotten how long it took for Kakashi to pick them up the first time around, but even for the copy nin, over 3 hours seemed a bit excessive. Then I don't think you have anything to worry about. I guarantee he won't meet up with you and your team for at least a few hours. A little breakfast now wouldn't hurt either. You'll have digested it all by the time he arrives anyway. Still, Naruto hesitated, shifting indecisively from foot to foot. But Sasuke team and Sakura-chan won't have anything to eat. Haruki smiled again in approval. How about this then? We still have some time before 6 so we can swing by Ichiraku's, pick up some ramen, and then you can take some back to your teammates. My treat, since you're keeping a secret for me. The blonde's eyes lit up again, obviously pleased by the suggestion. Thanks, Kazama-san. Haruki quirked an eyebrow as they began their trek to the ramen stand. Haruki is fine. Kazama-san makes me feel old. Although he thought reflectively. I feel old either way. Haruki-san then, Naruto peered almost shyly up at him. You're being really nice. Haruki suppressed the faint stirring of anger welling up inside him. While he knew the blonde was simply him as a child, it felt worse this time around seeing the loneliness in someone who, technically, was another person. His younger counterpart very much reminded him of Yasuke at the moment. And thinking of Yasuke, Haruki would have to find a way to adopt him again, but that would have to wait, no matter how much he disliked the idea. Leaving a 6-year-old alone in his apartment was hardly ideal. He would work on it when he came back. And I'd be nice to a new friend. Haruki smiled gently down at the boy, who ducked his head and flushed red with embarrassment but seemed equally pleased at the same time. The Redeed decided at that very moment that this Naruto, who had already suffered 12 years as the Konoha's pariah, would never know that pain and loneliness again, not while he was here. When he came back from Kumo, if he noticed so much as a glare from any of the villagers, he or she would be getting a taste, only a taste, as he didn't think Tsurutobi would be very pleased with him if he did any real damage to any of them, no matter how much they would deserve it, as to why enemy nin had all been ordered to flee on sight if they ever laid eyes on him before he had even turned 18. By the time they had reached the ramen stand, Naruto had opened up and had gone through all the reasons for disliking Sasuke team. He's a jerk and an arrogant bastard, and he has the personality of a rock, as well as all the reasons for liking Sakura-chan. She's pretty and cute and she has cool hair. Haruki only chuckled, absently surprised at the sound since he couldn't remember the last time he had openly shown amusement. Or shown amusement at all, for that matter. What would you like? Haruki eyed his wallet, wondering if he had promised my treat a bit too soon, but Naruto showed a commendable amount of restraint when he only listed 3 types of ramen. Could I have a miso ramen, a tonkatsu ramen for Sasuke, and a toriniku ramen for Sakura-chan? Please. Haruki smiled and nodded, glancing up when Tucci, and oh, the man was a sight for sore eyes. Both Tucci and AM had died when Konoha had been burned to the ground, but up until the very last moment, both father and daughter had carried on working, determined to give the Konoha citizens some semblance of normalcy amidst the depression of war, stepped out of the back of the shop, already smiling a greeting at the short blonde. "Good morning, Naruto. You're up early." Naruto grinned brightly at the owner of the ramen stand. "Morning, Tucci-san. I have training with my genin team this morning, but I came by to pick up breakfast first." Realization dawned on Tucci's face. "That's right. You've been assigned to a genin team. Well, a young ninja can't go hungry. What would you like?" While Naruto rattled off his orders, Haruki caught the older man's gaze as Tucci gave him an assessing look. He could recall that both Tucci and AM had been very protective of him, especially when he was younger, so the Redeed figured he should probably put the man at ease. "Dazama Haruki offered once Naruto finished talking. Naruto-kun's next-door neighbor." Tucci squinted at him. "I haven't seen you around before." Naruto cut in before Haruki could reply. "Haruki-san's been away for a long time. He just got back yesterday and he's treating me to ramen as a welcoming present." Naruto blinked almost owlishly as he seemed to realize that welcoming presents were usually given to the person moving in, and Haruki chuckled again, not noticing the way Tucci relaxed at the unexpectedly warm sound, nor the way Naruto stilled at it, a look of wonder lighting his eyes, as if unable to believe that anyone could laugh like that in his presence. "Yes," Haruki shrugged, taking out a few bills to cover the ramen fee. "I just moved in and met Naruto-kun this morning. Since neither of us have had breakfast yet, a lie, and Haruki reflexively crossed his fingers behind his wallet, I thought we'd swing by for ramen. Please add another miso ramen to the order." Tucci smiled again, waving a careless hand in the air as he started on the ramen. "Half price on everything today. Consider it a welcome home present from me, Haruki-san." Haruki blinked and then nodded his thanks, placing the correct amount of money on the counter before taking the seat next to Naruto to wait. "Haruki-san." Redeed glanced down at his younger counterpart, raising an eyebrow in question. The blonde squirmed in his seat, seemingly torn between two decisions before finally blurting out, "Could you show me a jutsu?" Haruki blinked at the request, taking in the puppy-like eagerness that was blatant on the blonde's face before nodding. As if he could refuse the blonde anything with a face like that. Besides, the boy reminded him far too much of his own genin team 8 years ago. Those three had learned how to play him for a sucker way too quickly, not that he had tried particularly hard to stop them. Staring out at the quiet town, Haruki considered his jutsus before raising his hands and going through the proper seals. "Fuiten. Go Denketsu Hashi no Mori." The blue swirl of wind chakra rushed around the street outside the stand, a gentle breeze compared to the maelstrom of wind Haruki was used to whipping up. Lances formed in the air at 5 equal points, surrounding one area before shooting forward. With a flick of his wrist, Haruki quickly dispelled it. Even holding back, a sizable hole would have formed in the ground, and he had no wish to do manual labor for the Sandai many times soon. Turning back to Naruto, Haruki blinked at the awestruck expression on the blonde's face. "That was so cool." Naruto gushed, nearly bouncing in his seat. "You're really strong." Haruki found himself rubbing the back of his head in his habitual movement when embarrassed. It wasn't as if the jutsu had been any higher than a B rank, and Naruto would one day be able to do it as well, seeing as he had been the one to create it. It wasn't even all that impressive, but he supposed to a genin, it really was something to see. "You'll be that strong one day too," Haruki answered firmly and watched in satisfaction as Naruto beamed up at him, obviously hearing the sincerity in the Redeed's voice. It wasn't as if he was lying either, and the blonde seemed to realize this as he sat a little taller. "Your ramen," Tucci cut in, placing 4 steaming bowls in front of them. As Naruto quickly dug into his bowl, the ramen stand owner glanced at Haruki again, his gaze softer this time, but also slightly puzzled. "You seem somewhat familiar," the man finally voiced, and Haruki forced himself not to tense up. "But I could swear I've never met you before." Haruki shrugged and said nothing, plucking a napkin from the counter and handing it to his younger counterpart as the blonde inhaled his ramen before picking up 2 more bowls and waiting for Naruto to finish. Tucci shook his head, offering a warm smile. "Never mind. Any friend of Naruto's is a friend of mine. Come back anytime. We're open the entire day." Haruki nodded silently, gaze sliding to Naruto as the boy finished up, shouted his thanks, and picked up the remaining bowl, Sasuke's, with careful hands as he slid off his seat and joined Haruki as he ducked out of the shop. Tucci waved them out with a smile, one which Naruto answered with a grin of his own, before the two set out towards the bridge. Haruki barely remembered to let Naruto lead, as he wasn't supposed to know where they were going. Soon, black and pink caught their attention, and Naruto quickly shouted out a greeting. Sasuke only cast the blonde a disinterested look before glancing at Haruki, black eyes assessing, and Haruki felt his heart twist painfully in his chest. He quickly turned his gaze to the last genin of Team 7, watching as she scowled in Naruto's direction, but directed a curious look at him. Again, the wide green eyes sent a rush of memories through his mind, some good, some bad, and all of them painful. He finally settled for keeping his eyes on his blonde companion. Somehow, that hurt less. "Hey Sakura-chan, Sasuke team. I brought you food." "Baka." Sakura immediately snapped, swatting at the blonde. "You're late and we're not supposed to eat." Naruto pouted and rubbed his head. "But Kakashi-sensei's going to be late anyway and a small breakfast won't hurt. Besides, Haruki-sen says it's okay." Haruki almost sweat-dropped when 3 pairs of eyes turned on him. Technically, he hadn't said it was okay, per se, but he supposed he had implied it, which meant he now had to take responsibility for his words. With an inward sigh, Haruki nodded cautiously. "Training with nothing in your stomach is dangerous for you. A small meal wouldn't hurt and your sensei will be late anyway. You'll have digested everything by the time he gets here." "See?" Naruto thrust the ramen bowl he had been holding in Sasuke's direction, taking the boy off guard and somehow managing to dump the bowl into the Uchiha's hands. "Eat it before it gets cold." Sasuke barely spared the blonde a glance before directing his cool gaze at Haruki. "Who are you?" he asked bluntly, his words falling just short of rude. Haruki, now more than used to Sasuke's personality, replied without being offended while Naruto scowled at the raven-haired boy, Kazama Haruki, Naruto-kun's next-door neighbor. "I met up with him this morning and thought some breakfast would help keep your strength up today." Sasuke said nothing more but, after a moment of consideration and a quick scan of Haruki's jounin vest, dug into his breakfast, nodding curtly at both him and Naruto. Haruki turned his gaze on the pink-haired Kunoichi next and offered the Toriniku ramen for the girl. Sakura blushed, ducking her head shyly as she glanced at Sasuke before replying uncertainly, "I'm on a diet." Haruki tilted his head contemplatively. He had forgotten that the Sakura at this age was much more, well, girl than Kunoichi. "It won't hurt," he assured after a moment, searching for the right words to convince her. Sakura liked books, in fact, so Haruki would use that. "You need a well-rounded diet to get a good figure and that includes carbohydrates. As a Kunoichi, you'll burn off anything you don't need when you train later. Not eating or only eating certain foods is bad for your body in the long run." Sakura's cheeks darkened as she glanced hesitantly at him. "You sure?" Haruki allowed a small smile to curve his lips as he extended the bowl again. "I'm sure." Mere seconds later, Haruki had Sakura eating her breakfast as well, and he turned to the blonde still standing at his side, now eyeing his teammate's ramen enviously. The Redeed smothered his amusement and extended his own bowl instead. "I can pick up my own breakfast later, Naruto-kun. Growing boys need food." Naruto only hesitated for a brief moment before flashing a grateful smile up at him and accepting the bowl, digging in with little fanfare. Haruki nodded in satisfaction before glancing up at the sky. "I should get going. Things to do. A bit of advice though. Do a bit of a warm-up after you finish eating. It'll help digestion." He directed another smile in Sakura's direction, who promptly blushed. "And it'll loosen your muscles when you're running around later. And later, during your test and even after that, try not to think too individually. You're a team now and your teammates are what will make you strong." Haruki carefully kept his gaze focused on all 3 of them, not singling anyone out. Sasuke would get defensive otherwise. "It's a testament to your own strength if you can see the strengths in other people and learn to work with them. Letting your teammates down because of pride or arrogance means you are just as weak as those who don't have enough physical strength. Weaker because you have no excuse." All 3 nodded, even Sasuke, who seemed surprisingly at ease in Haruki's presence, reminding the Redeed of his Sasuke, the one who had been happy with himself and content with the people around him. They looked somewhat puzzled at his last hint, and Sasuke frowned a little at the mention of pride being a weakness, but none of them questioned him further. Haruki hoped it would be enough to get the Uchiha thinking. He knew how the adult Sasuke thought, knew what buttons to push to encourage the part of Sasuke that would one day grow up to be a great man, but he could only start the ball rolling now and give a hand to the boy now and then. The rest would be up to the future Anbu general. Naruto paused from his eating, voicing a question that bordered on insecurity. "I'll see you later." Haruki smiled at the blonde's tact as he nodded, reaching out absently to ruffle his younger counterpart's bright hair as he stared down into inquisitive blue eyes. "Of course. Good luck on your test, duckling." Naruto blinked, obviously startled, though it was a toss-up as to who was more so. The blonde or Haruki. Duckling. Redeed found himself rubbing the back of his head again, repressing the embarrassment threatening to show on his face. "Ah, you reminded me of my old genin team for a moment. Short and small and, well, my apologies." Naruto seemed to consider this for a moment, pouting most likely at the short and small part, before flashing an almost pleased grin up at Haruki. "It's okay. I don't mind." Haruki raised his eyebrows but said nothing more, nodding a farewell to the blonde before doing the same to the other 2. Without another word, the Redeed quickly hurried away. He had planned to start out earlier, but he hadn't taken lingering with the rest of Team 7 to give them health advice into account. No matter. 5 days was plenty to get to Kumo and back if he kept moving. XXX. Yo. All 3 Team 7 soon-to-be genin members turned various expressions of murder on the silver-haired jounin in front of them. You're late. Both Naruto and Sakura accused, while even Sasuke glared daggers at the masked nin. Kakashi just smiled at them. Sorry, I got lost on the road of life. Liar. Naruto and Sakura chimed again, scowling fiercely at the jounin. Kakashi shrugged carelessly, eyes flickering briefly to the nearby trash can and noting the 3 bowls of ramen. Ma, ready for your test. XXX. Naruto pouted as he eyed the lunchbox in each of his teammates' hands. He wriggled from his position, struggling with the ropes holding him to the tree stump. His stomach suddenly growled, breaking the silence, and the blonde promptly scowled, ducking his head as both his teammates glanced at him. He jerked a little when a bento box appeared in his line of sight and, following the hand that held it, Naruto blinked in confusion as he found himself staring into Onyx. Sasuke only frowned a little, extending some tempura in the blonde's direction. Eat, Sasuke snapped gruffly. You got us breakfast earlier. I'm just paying you back. Naruto gaped before grinning widely and accepting the food. He almost choked on it when another bento was thrust into his face, a red-faced Sakura scowling at him. Just this once. The kunoichi snapped, offering one of the rice balls from her lunch. And it isn't as if you bought us breakfast, but like Haruki-san said, you'll be useless if you don't eat something. Naruto grinned again, features bright. Thanks Sakura-chan, Sasuke team. Sasuke just rolled his eyes. HN. Just hurry up dope before sensei gets back. Naruto quickly swallowed the rice ball, smiling contentedly for a moment before his eyes widened, watching as a strong wind rolled in and the sky darkened. Kakashi appeared, staring forebodingly at them as the ground shook. You 3. He barked, looming over them. Sasuke, Sakura, I told you not to feed him. What have you got to say for yourselves? Sasuke only glared right back, chin tilted up defiantly as he unconsciously shifted to place Naruto further behind him. Beside him, Sakura had flushed and her eyes were wide with alarm, but her shoulders squared as if preparing for battle, and her gaze never wavered from the copy nin. Behind both of them, Naruto scowled at Kakashi, blue eyes narrowed. This was his team, damn it. They had gone to bat for him. He couldn't let them take the fall. We're a team. Naruto glared fiercely as their sensei's gaze turned on him. Don't just single them out. Besides, I'm the one who ate the food. Shut up dope, Sasuke tossed a dark look over his shoulder at the blonde. I offered when you were already hungry. It's not just your fault. Sakura scrambled closer to her 2 teammates, elbowing the tied-up genin roughly. Yeah, I chose to feed you too. Stop trying to act tough. It makes you look stupid. All 3 turned back to their sensei as Kakashi came even closer, visible eye unreadable. If that's how you 3, then I have no choice but to pass you. A stunned silence fell over the 3 genin as their surroundings returned to Morrow, and Kakashi eye smiled at them again, crouching down to their level. You 3 are the first team I've ever passed, he told them cheerfully. You stuck up for one another instead of just listening to me. His eye turned somber, studying them with careful consideration. You have to remember. In the world of ninjas, those who break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. All 3 genin were quiet for a moment, taking this in as Haruki's last piece of advice came back to them. They glanced at each other. How had the Redeed known? Well, Kakashi continued in a lighter tone, rising and stuffing his hands into his pockets. Team 7 will start missions tomorrow. Meet at the bridge at 6. But the poof, the copy nin disappeared and, unbeknownst to the newly formed Team 7, reappeared in a tree nearby, observing them with a steady eye. Below, Sasuke rose to his feet, dusting himself off as Sakura quickly packed up the lunches and placed them by the stump. Kakashi would probably come back for them later. Both of them turned to stare at the blonde of their team before Sasuke finally heaved a sigh and took out a kunai, cutting the ropes with quick efficiency. Boy dope, Sasuke voiced, idly twirling his kunai as Naruto landed on his feet and stretched out his limbs. Who is your neighbor? How did he know Kakashi-sensei's test would be based on teamwork? Naruto shrugged sheepishly as even Sakura focused on him with curious attentiveness. I dunno. He just moved in next to me. He just returned from an 8-year-long mission and needed a new place to live. And he knew Kakashi-sensei was going to be late, which was why he offered to buy us breakfast. Just like that? Sakura questioned, looking puzzled. I mean, he doesn't really know us, does he? And he's a jounin. Why would he bother with a bunch of genin? Naruto shrugged again, one hand reaching up to rub the back of his head. I don't know, but… Dope, stop. Sasuke suddenly ordered, and Naruto instinctively froze as even Sakura was blinking at him with a startled expression on her face. Sasuke studied the smaller boy with careful consideration before murmuring, he did the exact same thing. Did what? Naruto glanced nervously between his two teammates. Can I put my arm down now? Sakura quickly nodded but didn't look away as Naruto dropped his arm back to his side. Naruto, she said in a hushed voice. Are you sure you don't know him? Haruki-san rubbed his head like that too. Naruto tilted his head in confusion. Lots of people do that, don't they? I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one. Sasuke and Sakura actually exchanged a look before turning back to the blonde. Yeah, Sasuke agreed carefully. But the way he does it just gives off the same. He trailed off, eyes flickering away as he seemed to realize he was taking far too much interest in something unrelated to his training. Sakura quickly picked up the train of thought from her crush though. It gives off the same feel, she tried to explain. I mean, when Haruki-san did it earlier, the action seemed really familiar to me, but I didn't make the connection until I saw you do it now. You always rub your head like that. Naruto frowned but dropped any suspicions easily enough. Well, I've never met him before, but I think he's nice. And I don't think he was faking any of it either. I mean, even Sasuke team listened to him without pretending not to. Sasuke twitched before tucking his kunai away and turning in the direction of his home. Whatever. I'm leaving. Do us all a favor, dope, and don't get tied to any more tree stumps. And just like that, everything went back to normal as Sakura rushed after the raven-haired genin asking for a date with a rising blush in her face, and Naruto scowled after them and went on his own way, deciding to head to Iruka's apartment first to tell the man the good news. Still hidden in the shadows of the nearby tree, Kakashi ran an absent hand through his hair. Interesting. Someone in Konoha knew of his tardiness and more importantly, his tests, someone who had been away from Konoha for the past 8 years. Last time he checked, he hadn't been a sensei 8 years ago. He paused to consider this. Surely the Sandaime would be willing to tell him something about this Haruki. He checked the sun's position and, deeming himself a sufficient 3 hours late for reporting back to the Hokage, disappeared in a puff of smoke. XXX. Late, Kakashi. I don't even know why I bother anymore. Kakashi smiled at the Hokage before whipping out his newest Itch of Paradise book. Around him, several of the other jounin twitched and Kurenai looked ready to deck him. The Hokage just sighed and waved a dismissive hand in the air. Alright, now that we're finally all here, tell me whether you passed your teams or not. Team 1. Pass. Team 2. Pass. Team 3. Fail. Team 4. Pass. Team 5. Fail. Team 6. Fail. Team 7. Pass. Dead silence met this announcement as all the present jounin turned to stare dubiously at the copy nin. Kakashi glanced up from his book, eyes scanning the room lazily, and a faint smirk became visible behind his mask. The Hokage only shook his head, a small smile curving his lips as he marked the answer down. He hadn't expected anything less, seeing as Haruki had given no indication that his younger counterpart would fail, but it was still shocking for Kakashi to actually pass a team. Team 8. Pass. Team 9. Fail. And Team 10. Pass. Sarutobi nodded his approval. The new batch of genin seemed to show promise. Very well, missions for your genin teams will start tomorrow. Dismissed. The jounins piled out of the office, some shooting curious glances at Kakashi as the copy nin made no move to leave. Kakashi, Sarutobi started, some idea of what the man wanted already forming in his mind. Can I help you with something? Kakashi straightened, tucking his book away as he made sure the office door was shut before turning to the Hokage. Ma, I came across something interesting today. Oh? Yes, a man named Haruki. I only got his first name. My students were talking about him. A jounin recently returning from an 8-year-long mission who knows how my tests work. Sarutobi forced down the urge to show his amusement, carefully keeping his face neutral as he studied the curiosity flashing in Kakashi's visible eye. You must mean Kazama Haruki. Sarutobi offered, watching the faint frown pass over the jounin's brow. He just returned yesterday from an infiltration mission. He's good at what he does. Getting information on you wouldn't be too hard for him. Kakashi nodded slowly but added bluntly, I've never heard of him. Sarutobi shrugged nonchalantly. You were Anbu 8 years ago, Kakashi. And I didn't exactly announce his mission to the village. He's a quiet man. You might have missed him. Kakashi nodded again. Do you know where he is now? Around, Sarutobi voiced vaguely. I've given him some vacation time. He deserves it. Planning to interrogate him yourself? Kakashi had the decency to look sheepish. Just curious, Hokage-sama. My kids seem quite taken with him. Besides, if he's a fellow jounin, I'd like to get to know him. What does he look like? Sarutobi chuckled. Look for red hair. You can't miss him. Once he returns, of course. he added mentally. Kakashi nodded his thanks, sketching a quick salute before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. Sarutobi stared disapprovingly at the pile of foliage now in his office. Really, couldn't they just use the door? It was there for a reason. XXX. The figure slipped unseen over the wall surrounding the shrine, passing by the lax guards placed at the entrance. Red hair tucked neatly away, the black-clad nin quickly sped into the interior of the shrine, pausing only long enough to deactivate the simple seals placed around the small building housing the body of Hyuga Hisashi. For someone as hated as the Hyuga clan head's brother, the man really did get quite a resting place. Haruki supposed this had more to do with the fact that they simply wanted to flaunt the fact that they had Hisashi's body, while ignoring the fact that they had failed to get their hands on Hyuga Hisashi. Either way, while the shrine was simple enough, the place was also built quite elegantly, trees planted on either side of the shrine, with statues lined up on either side of the path. The red paint coloring the roof was well maintained as well, and the grass surrounding the shrine was well kept. No torches were lit inside the shrine, which made Haruki's work that much easier. Reaching the dust-covered coffin in which Hisashi had been laid out, Haruki noted the somewhat complex seal on the lid. He frowned. This was not the seal he had come across in his former life. That seal had just been placed on the coffin for keeping the corpse from decomposing. A simple enough seal. This one. Haruki leaned in closer, studying the symbols that made up the seal. When he had retrieved Hisashi's body with Niji in the other timeline, he had been 19, 7 years from now in this current timeline. Why would the seal on a dead body be different between the two times? His eyes suddenly focused on the center of the seal, a swirl of symbols that defined suspended life. Suspended life. The only reason that would be here. With a mental curse, Haruki silently pulled out a piece of paper, ink, and a brush. He really hoped this wasn't what he thought it was. He had worked with life suspension seals before, having come across them when going through Sasori's heart container. He knew how to counter it. A few minutes later, he slapped the counter seal on top of the coffin. A brief flash of chakra lit the coffin lid before the ink on both seals disappeared. Quietly, Haruki lifted the lid of the coffin, putting it aside carefully before taking a deep breath and looking inside. He stared. It was official. Someone up there seriously hated him. Impassively, he watched the gentle rise and fall of Hyuga Hisashi's chest as his mind raced at this new turn of events. The man had clearly been dead when he and Niji had gone to fetch the body. Clearly. Which meant Kumo or someone else had killed the man sometime before Haruki had turned 19. He leaned closer and noted the familiar thin scar marring the man's throat, a calculated cut for murdering prisoners. Obviously, they had planned on killing him, someone had figured out what the Hyuga's curse seal would do once the man was dead, someone else had then managed to save him, and then had Hisashi preserved until they could figure out how to break the curse seal. Naruto scoffed. He had figured that out by the time he had turned 16. Apparently, one had a lot of free time on their hands when infiltrating enemy countries. He had spent an entire year in Iwa and had managed to figure out both the caged bird seal and Orochimaru's curse seal. Not bad for a 15-year-old. But right now, none of those thoughts helped. On one hand, if he didn't take Hyuga Hisashi's body back, he would have a guilty conscience for not getting the poor man out while he was still alive. The Hyuga clan would be up in arms if they ever found out. Niji would probably want his head on a silver platter if the same thing happened, and he would have no proof of his spying in Kumo for the council. But, and it was one hell of a but, nothing unexpected would happen in this timeline if he stuck to his plan and retrieved a dead Hyuga Hisashi and not a live one. On the other hand, if he did take Hyuga Hisashi's body back, he would be guilt-free, and Kami knew how much guilt he already had on his shoulders. He didn't need any more, the Hyuga clan would be indebted to him for forever, and a day, Niji would have his father back, and he would have sufficient proof for the council. But, and there was a shitload of buts this time, the Hyuga clan would never keep quiet about something like this. He had no idea how the Sandaime wanted to play this. Hokage would probably regain an age-old enemy out of Kumo before the week was out, another war would start, his purpose for coming back would become null and void, and the timeline would be completely fucked up. It would be unbelievable what the difference between a dead man and a live one could make if it wasn't currently staring him in the face. Literally. Kami, he wasn't even being paid for this. Haruki grimaced, closing his eyes briefly and pinching the bridge of his nose as he debated on his next action. Given his two choices, the logical one would be the first. There was a whole lot less that could go wrong. His mind said option 1. Too bad his heart said option 2. He breathed deeply, staring down at the comatose Hyuga again. Niji had once told him a little about his father during one of the rare lulls in the war when it had just been the two of them holed up in one of the shabby tents set up on the battlefield. Niji had told him how his father had been quite bitter with the main house because of the caged bird seal. But he had later learned from Aashi that, while he had been angry about this, his father had also taken Aashi's place during the Hyuga affair of his own free will, having forcefully stopped Aashi from refusing his decision. To Naruto, Hyuga Aashi seemed like a good man, and Naruto knew all about how angry one could get over having a seal put on oneself without consent. Haruki sighed and straightened, quickly drawing up another life suspension seal and unsealing the body clone he had brought along to replace his Aashi. In the end, he was just stalling for time. He had known, from the moment he had realized that the man was still alive, that he would not be leaving without his former future second-in-command's father. Besides, he doubted the Kumo shinobi came regularly to check up on someone the rest of the world thought was dead. With a little chakra manipulation, the body clone was now an exact replica of Hyuga Aashi, down to the scar running across his throat, with the exception of the no-breathing part. Gently, Haruki lifted his Aashi from the coffin with minimal difficulty, making sure the simple kimono he was wearing didn't catch on anything and carefully placing the man on the ground against a nearby pillar. While the seal had kept the man alive without food or water, seals like that also didn't work forever, and the seal's recipient's health would decline over time. His Aashi was already too thin. From there, the Redeed quickly replaced his Aashi with a body clone, shutting the coffin again and activating the new life suspension seal. The body inside the coffin would still be unanimated since it had never been alive in the first place, but the seal would look like it was working at the very least. Clearing up any evidence of his presence from the shrine and brushing away the few fingerprints he had imprinted on the coffin, Haruki scanned the room one last time before scooping up the Hyuga clan head's brother and slipping out of the shrine. Again, leaving the shrine was just as easy as getting in, even with an extra burden. Stopping once he reached the mountain pass that would eventually lead him back to Konoha, Haruki paused to consider his options. He couldn't seal the man into a scroll, and he really didn't want to use his space-time ninjutsu with a physically fragile man in tow. Haruki scowled. This seriously put a wrench in his plans. He had been planning on flashing back to the Konoha gates to cut down travel time, getting him back to the village in the promised 5 days, but now, with a little over a day to get back. "Kurama, you awake?" Silence, and then a low grumbling growl reverberated in his mind as the fox yawned. "What do you want, kid?" "I need a lift back to Konoha. Got an unexpected passenger." Haruki felt the Kyuubi stir in his mindscape. Isn't that human supposed to be dead? The Redeed sighed gloomily. "I feel like an ass for thinking this, but things would be so much simpler if he was." The demon fox snorted and then a bright flash of red glowed briefly beside Haruki and Kurama appeared beside him, stretching languidly as he waved his 9 tails behind him. "Hop on, kid." The Kyuubi turned one intelligent purple eye on Haruki. "I'll get you home on time." Naruto smiled gratefully before clambering on, settling his Aashi in front of him to make sure the man didn't fall off along the way. Riding Kurama was a lot like flying during a storm after all. XXX. Kakashi found himself with a slight tick over one eye when his genin team managed to find Tora in record-breaking time. Again. And the record they had broken was their own. From 3 days ago. He had no idea what had happened to his team. What had happened to the fangirl and the Avenger and the dead last. Ever since the genin test, the three seemed to have clicked and Kakashi couldn't be happier that his students were now working well together, better than he could have ever hoped for, but changes like the ones he had observed didn't happen for no reason. While Naruto and Sasuke still argued and Sakura was still violent-prone towards the hyperactive blonde, all three seemed content enough to put aside their differences, or at least work with their differences, enough to complete all the D-rank missions Kakashi had thrown at them. Whatever the mysterious Haruki had told them before he had arrived the day of the genin test seemed to have stuck with them, and even Sasuke, the so-called Avenger and loner of the group, seemed to have put serious consideration in what they had heard. But it wasn't even the fact that some other jounin had managed to inspire them to work together and not Kakashi that irked the copy nin so much, it was the fact that he couldn't find the man. He was an ex-Anbu captain for Kami's sake. How hard could it be to find one red-haired jounin in his own village? And worst of all, he had even gone back to the Sandaime to ask for the Redeed's whereabouts, only to be told that what Haruki did in his own time was his business and Sarutobi was not going to drag the man back to work just because Kakashi was dying of equal parts curiosity and paranoia. For the rest of his life, Kakashi would swear blind that his Hokage had been silently laughing at him the entire time. With a hidden grimace as Naruto bounced up to him, Tora in his somewhat scratched hands and Sakura and Sasuke coming up behind him, Kakashi sighed and nodded. "Alright, good job. Naruto, let Sakura and Sasuke take the cat back to the daimyo's wife." Before any of them could ask why, the copy nin quickly doled out a half-lie, "You returned the cat last time. I want Sakura and Sasuke to do it this time. Make sure to be polite, no matter what happens, understand?" Sakura nodded quickly enough, happy to spend more time with Sasuke, and took Tora from Naruto, but Sasuke shot him a searching look before glancing at Naruto, eyes speculative, even as he turned away. That was another difference. Whatever Haruki had said, Sasuke now seemed to study his two teammates more seriously and, on several occasions, had already made use of Naruto's cage bunshin. The Uchiha had half-suggested, half-ordered Naruto to send his bunshins to scope out the terrain when Kakashi had set up an obstacle course for them and then had Naruto disperse them and relate back to the team what traps the copy nin had managed to set up and had also gotten Sakura, with her knowledge of theory and facts, to teach Naruto whenever the blonde couldn't quite understand something Kakashi was teaching them. Sometimes, even Sasuke would listen in, his face carefully blank and turned away, but a telltale glint of concentration in his eyes nonetheless. The Uchiha prodigy was cataloging his team's strengths and weaknesses and utilizing them accordingly. Kakashi knew Chunin and even Jounin couldn't do what Sasuke was learning to do. And it wasn't just Sasuke either. Sakura and Naruto had also changed a little. Sakura, though still obviously crushing on Sasuke, seemed better able to concentrate now that the Uchiha was not completely ignoring the pink-haired Kunoichi. She was now eating more too, even though the file Kakashi had received from the Hokage had mentioned that the girl was on a diet that leaned towards unhealthy. In addition to that, the regular civil interaction she had with Naruto when Sasuke asked her to explain something to the blonde seemed to gain her some toleration towards Naruto as well. Naruto on the other hand was still just as cheerful, but the confidence that had seemed somewhat forced when Kakashi had first met him on the roof now appeared more genuine. It showed in the way the blonde walked through the streets as the civilians threw him dirty looks and whispered behind his back. Sakura and Sasuke had both picked up on this and would always make sure that the blonde walked between them, though Kakashi wasn't sure if this was done unconsciously or not. In turn, Naruto held his head a little higher and his grins were a little more real, the sunny smile sometimes causing a slight pain in his chest for reasons he wasn't sure of, though that was slowly fading and being replaced by fondness for his bright-haired student. Naruto was also surprisingly gracious when he couldn't do something that his teammates could, as he had seen during the few obstacle courses he had set up one day. Even Sasuke would try something himself and only turn to Naruto or Sakura when he had frustrated himself in trying to do something he obviously couldn't without help. Naruto instinctively trusted his teammates to take care of themselves in the areas they were good at and back them up when they couldn't. Kakashi could actually see the beginnings of what could be an amazing team a decade from now. They were still rough around the edges though, still mere children, and far from skilled enough to pull off any real missions outside of the village, no matter how well they worked together, not to mention that they still fought a little too much, though Kakashi couldn't actually see that ever going away. But he could see it. If he squinted and looked hard enough, maybe turned his head a little to the left and tilted it at just the right angle under the mid-afternoon sun, he could make out what they could eventually become. While Sakura was the voice of reason on Naruto's left and Sasuke the shadow guard on the blonde Jinchuriki's right, Naruto would be their center, bright and shining, and suddenly, in the rare fascinating times Kakashi could see all this, Naruto's dream of becoming Hokage didn't seem all that impossible anymore. Of course, then Naruto would do something stupid, Sakura would slap him upside the head, and Sasuke would roll his eyes and heave a put upon sigh at having been stuck on Team 7, and then Kakashi would blink and wonder if he had gone temporarily insane. But all these changes, in less than a week. Kakashi's curiosity had kept his genin team out for training for more than the allotted half a day, but none of them seemed to really mind, and Kakashi had managed to learn more about his team this way. It was seriously throwing a wrench in his lifestyle. He wasn't even late by more than an hour anymore, sometimes even less, and, while he usually had his book out in front of him, more often than not, he was observing his team instead. Which brought him back to the fact that he still couldn't find the man responsible. Kakashi had even dropped by Naruto's apartment building at odd times, though only in passing, since waiting for the man outside his apartment was borderline creepy, even for him, and the copy nin had drawn the line at outright stalking. But since the Sandaime wasn't inclined to help him and his fellow Jounins were worse than useless, since none of them seemed to know Kazama Haruki, Kakashi was now stooping down to drill his blonde student. Surely Naruto, who lived next to the man, could give him a hand. In some part of his mind that Kakashi was adept at ignoring since he had more than his fair share of odd quirks, a voice was cheerfully informing him that his so-called curiosity was quickly becoming an unhealthy obsession and that perhaps he should head over to the hospital for a mental checkup. Like everything else that voice told him, Kakashi ignored it. Naruto, Kakashi started casually. Do you know where Kazama-sen is? He wasn't sure how old the red-haired Jounin was, but Sarutobi talked about Haruki the same way he talked to Kakashi, so the copy nin assumed they were at least around the same age. Somewhere around, I guess. Haruki-san is kinda quiet, so he probably likes spending some time alone. Blue eyes blinked innocently up at him throughout the blonde's answer. Kakashi was instantly suspicious. For one, he had seen the Hokage himself fold like wet paper when Naruto batted those eyes at him, and for another, Naruto had said almost the exact same thing the Hokage had told him on more than one occasion. Really? Kakashi crossed his arms. He supposed it wasn't really fair to seem intimidating, but it wasn't as if it actually worked. All three of his genins seemed immune to his posturing after that first day. But Naruto only grinned up at him, an excited gleam entering his eyes as he almost bounced on the spot. Really? You can even stop by our apartment building tonight. You'll probably see him then. I can introduce you. Kakashi blinked. This was not what he had been expecting. Naruto was actually giving him a time when the Redeed would actually be present. Maybe he should have asked the blonde earlier. Well, okay then, Kakashi quickly smiled at his student and whipped out his book to hide his sudden confusion. He was sure he was missing something here. I'll swing by at around 8, okay? Naruto nodded before waving goodbye and bouncing off in the direction of his favorite raiment stand. Kakashi sighed and almost slapped himself with his book. Seriously, he felt like he was completely out of the loop here. But he wanted to meet this Kazama Haruki. He wanted to know what kind of man could influence a bunch of kids so much with only a few choice words. XXX. Thanks for the lift, Kurama. I can take it from here. The demon fox nodded distractedly, eyeing the village they could just see beyond a thick crop of trees. I don't see it, the Kyuubi finally decided. I have no idea what you see in that village. Humans. Emotional lot, all of you. And with that said, the fox disappeared with a swish of his tails, reappearing in Haruki's mindscape and promptly settling down for another nap. Haruki huffed in amusement but paid the fox no mind. A demon just didn't see things the same way humans did. Adjusting his grip on Hyuga his Aashi, Haruki quickly summoned a small yellow fox without using seals. Go to Sarutobi-sama. He ordered. Tell him that I've finished but some complications have risen and I need a private audience. Tell him to use the seal once his office is cleared. The fox dipped her head in acknowledgement before loping off in the direction of the village. Mere minutes later, Haruki felt a faint tug in his mind and he stepped without hesitation to the Sandame's location, tightening his hold on his Aashi. A shorter distance was better when he traveled with an unconscious person in tow. Appearing in the office, Haruki looked up to find a frozen Sarutobi staring at the man Haruki was carrying with deceiving placidity. Several seconds ticked by and the Redeed waited patiently for the Sandame to pull himself together. Oh dear, Sarutobi finally managed faintly. Haruki snorted, glancing around and walking over to the couch in the side office to put his Aashi down. Yeah, understatement old man. Sarutobi sighed, walking over to stand beside him. This really is Hyuga his Aashi. Yup, Haruki pulled off the bandana that had kept his hair out of sight. Startled the hell out of me too. In my time, Niji and I went to get him and he was very much dead, but I was 19 at the time. The seal from that time was different too. It was just a body stasis seal. The seal I came across yesterday was a life suspension seal. And you managed to break it. A note of amazement rang in the older Hokage's voice. Haruki smirked just a little, a thrum of pride warming his heart. I'm a Fuinjutsu master, old man. I'm better than Raya. Sarutobi smiled warmly up at him, noticeable pride glowing on the old man's features, and Naruto found himself smiling back just a little. This man's opinion had always been important to him, even after he had died. So what should we do now? Haruki cleared his throat a little, stepping away. He wasn't too used to private emotional moments, and too much time actually part of one made him uncomfortable. Sarutobi med thoughtfully, tactfully ignoring the slightly embarrassed shift in Haruki's expression. Well, the Hyuga clan will have to be notified. You replaced his Aashi-sen with the clone. Haruki inclined his head, arms crossed in front of him. I did, and I replaced the life suspension seal as well. So long as no one opens the coffin and examines it too closely, the switch should go by unnoticed. At least until one of those Kumo nins get it into their heads that they might know how to get rid of the caged bird seal without killing the man, and the Raikage lets them. Sarutobi shot him a speculative glance. Do you? Haruki smiled thinly. I can get rid of any seal, old man. The Sandame's eyes widened. Even Orochimaru's curse seal. Haruki's face darkened. Especially Orochimaru's curse seal. Sarutobi stared for a moment longer before shaking his head fondly. You've grown up well, Haruki-kun. Haruki shrugged. Circumstances, old man. Circumstances and necessity. The Hokage only nodded this time, understanding without asking. Well, we won't be able to keep this a secret for very long. Kumo only asked for Hiashi-sen's body though, and then eventually settled for his Aashi-sen's body. There were no terms for a prisoner. We could use that to our advantage. Or, old man, Haruki reminded, running a hand over tired eyes. We don't want war. Sarutobi nodded in agreement, eyes briefly showing concern at the desolation in the Redeed's voice. Of course not. We would need some legitimate way to place his Aashi-sen back in Konoha without alerting them to the fact that Konoha managed to send someone into Kumo for his body. Haruki absently unsealed his Jounin vest from a scroll and tugged it on, eyes distant as his mind recalled all those strategy sessions he and Shikamaru had sat through, suggesting tactic after tactic, building on them, perfecting them. An idea formed in his mind and Haruki looked back at Sarutobi who, to his credit, had stayed patiently silent as Haruki took a trip down memory lane. Haruki rubbed the back of his head. Sorry. I have an idea. What if we say that the life suspension seal had been weakened with time? The coffin was covered in dust so it's obvious no one's poked around there for a while. We could say that his Aashi-sen managed to escape because the seal's hold on him slipped enough for him to get out. I could go back to Kumo and blow the shrine sky high. I'll leave some evidence of a faded life suspension seal lying in the wreckage before making my way back to Konoha. We could say his Aashi-sen blew up the place. I mean, a disoriented man waking up inside a box is hardly ideal for anyone. He would try to get himself out and he could claim temporary selective memory loss. The mountains in Kaminari no Kuni are distinctive and he would have realized where he was and, not remembering much of anything, immediately set out for home. That could place him in Konoha without us ever having to lift a finger. Konoha finds out, the shit hits the fan, and Kumo has no room for deniability this time around. You said so yourself. A prisoner was not the deal we made with Kumo. We get his Aashi-sen back, Kumo can't declare war on us, and we'll have total control of the entire situation. This will also solve the problem between me and the council. In my time, it took a while to find out where his Aashi-sen's body was hidden. 8 years in Kumo is sufficient time to find out and long enough for a less than average seal's power to decline enough for someone to break through. Dead silence met him as Haruki finished and the Redeed blinked at the almost slack expression on Sarutobi's face. The man looked slightly dumbfounded and seemed to be trying to find the right words. Luckily, another voice cut in before Haruki started worrying about shock. I agree with this plan. The voice came from the couch and both of them started, snapping their heads to stare into distinctive Byakugan eyes. His Ashi's voice had been gravelly with misuse, but still steady as he gazed straight at Haruki. Haruki froze, immediately wondering how long the man had been awake. He had been stupid. All ninjas were trained to be able to go from unconscious to conscious without any visible signs. He should have made sure. Haruki-san, was it? Haruki tensed under the Hyuga's contemplative gaze. How long have you been awake? He asked stiffly. His Ashi slowly shifted into a sitting position. Long enough to gather that you seem to be at least acquaintances with a version of my son old enough to infiltrate Komagakure. An uncomfortable silence settled over the three of them and Haruki idly wondered if he could whack the Hyuga over the head hard enough to actually give him memory loss. Then again, he doubted the Hokage would be very happy about it. I will not pursue this issue any further, his Ashi suddenly interrupted his thoughts. Nor will I repeat anything I have heard today to anyone else. It is the very least I can do for the man who seems to have saved my life. Haruki blinked at this unexpected turn, studying his Ashi's face for any sign of deceit before glancing at Sarutobi. The Sandaime was smiling faintly. It seemed neither of them believed the Hyuga to be lying. Haruki grunted and shrugged, backing away into the comfort of the shadows before moving into the side kitchen and out of sight of the other two occupants of the office. He had gotten used to staying hidden whenever he could back during the war. The habit would probably never leave him. Well then, moving on, Sarutobi finally spoke, ignoring the slight tension in the air mostly caused by the Redeed. His Ashi-san, how do you feel? The Ashi shifted a little, testing his limbs as he clenched and unclenched his hands. Stiff, but that will go away soon enough. May I trouble you for a cup of water, Hokage-sama? Sarutobi immediately nodded, but Haruki was already moving back into the room, a cup of water in one hand. Wordlessly, he handed it to the Hyuga before backing away, glancing back into the kitchen as Sarutobi and his Ashi realized that they could hear water beginning to boil. His Ashi nodded slowly in thanks, studying the Redeed half hidden in shadows with puzzled curiosity. The man didn't give off an unapproachable aura and when he had woken up halfway back to Konoha on the Flying Fox, Haruki's hold on him had been careful and protective. Now the man just seemed uneasy, as if he wasn't sure what to do with his Ashi, now that his Ashi knew. And yes, he knew. He had picked up enough to realize this was the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, and last time he had checked, Uzumaki Naruto had been the vessel and should only be, by all means, 8 years older than the last time he had glimpsed the boy. He suspected that the red hair was a henge, though he couldn't detect anything. His Ashi had also figured out that this man was most likely from the future, or at least a parallel universe, not that he was an expert on the subject. And the casual way he had mentioned his son's name, even in passing, held a certain quality of warm affection, and his Ashi had no doubt that the two had been friends. He could tell that this man was powerful too. A Fuinjutsu master and an excellent strategist if the plan the man had spun on the spot was anything to go by. Studying the redeed carefully, Aashi frowned at the exhaustion he could see in the tense line of the man's shoulders, a fatigue that he doubted was from his so-called mission to Kumo. Eyes far too old for such a young man confirmed that. And the way Haruki had mentioned war earlier, the deep disgust and grieving sorrow mixed together to form the word, could only have come from a war veteran far too used to blood and death. But he had also felt the innate kindness in the redeed when the man had carried him home, had seen the absolute trust the Sandaime had in Haruki, and the instinctive attentiveness Haruki possessed when he had guessed what his Aashi had wanted before he had even asked for it. The kettle suddenly sounded and the redeed was already moving, a flash of crimson fire amongst the shadows. The kettle cut off and the sound of cupboards opening and closing reached their ears. A minute later, Haruki was back, ramen in one hand and a fork in the other. His Aashi's eyebrows rose. The redeed had even caught the fact that there was no way his fingers would have enough dexterity to use chopsticks at the moment. "Thank you," his Aashi spoke aloud this time, hoping to allay some of the worried anxiety flashing in the man's blue gaze by showing his own sincere gratitude. The redeed studied him for a moment, blue eyes piercing before the intensity disappeared and a softer look replaced the earlier tension in Haruki's features. "You're welcome." The redeed huffed a little, the slightest hint of embarrassment showing on his face, and his Aashi caught a glimpse of the blonde boy this man had grown up from. Sarutobi, watching this exchange, tried not to let his amusement show. Really, first Kakashi and now his Aashi. Haruki was reeling people in without even being aware of it. "Alright, back to the plan." Sarutobi drew their attention back to him as he turned to Haruki. "It's an excellent plan. There are a few parts that will have to be smoothed out, but overall, since his Aashi-san has agreed, we can work with it." Haruki nodded once in acknowledgement and Sarutobi turned back to his Aashi. "For now, his Aashi-san will have to stay here. No one comes into my office and the seals on the doors hide any chakra signals anybody give off once I activate them. Is that alright?" His Aashi nodded as well and Sarutobi turned once more to Haruki. "Good work, Haruki-kun. Go home and get some rest. I'll have one of my Anbu go get you when the council convenes. You'll want to be present." "Yes," Haruki ran a hand through his hair, adjusting his jounin vest as he got ready to leave. "There is also another matter I want to speak to you about, but it can wait until tomorrow, much as I don't like the idea. Right now, I suppose you'll want to move fast." "Indeed." Sarutobi agreed, already grinning. "And Haruki-kun. You might want to prepare yourself for a visit from Kakashi very soon. He's been running all over the village looking for you since you left 5 days ago." Haruki eyed the Hokage dubiously. "Kakashi? Why?" Sarutobi shrugged. "You seem to have made quite an impact on his genin team. He wants to meet you, but it's been quite entertaining watching him looking for someone who hasn't even been here the entire time. I haven't seen him work so hard in a long time." Haruki snorted, rolling his eyes. "Great. Not only is he a pervert, Kakashi's turned into a stalker. Just my luck." With one last shake of his head, the redeed nodded at his Aashi, who had managed to stand, if somewhat unsteadily, and had sketched a respectful bow, the slightest of smiles on his face when he straightened up again. "Thank you again, Haruki-san." Haruki flashed him the briefest of smiles, something on his face relaxing before he turned to Sarutobi again and sketched his own salute. With a wave, the redeed disappeared and the remaining occupants could just catch the sound of Haruki's foot pushing off from the windowsill of the outer office. "He's an interesting man," his Aashi commented after a short pause, sitting down again and picking up his ramen. "Yes," Sarutobi agreed genially. "He has been great once and there is no doubt in my mind that he will be great again, whether or not he wishes to be so." Chapter 3 Interlude. An evening of introductions. "Welcome home, Haruki-san." Blinking tiredly, Haruki turned to see a familiar blonde bound up to him, blue eyes wide, a bright smile already splitting his features. Only the faintest traces of uncertainty lurked just under the surface of that expression, and that too quickly dissipated when Haruki openly smiled down at the boy. "Hello duckling, I didn't expect to see you so soon. Did you pass your genin test?" Naruto beamed up at him. "Yup. Kakashi-sensei wanted us to learn teamwork, but we didn't know that at first and we all tried to attack him to get the bells cuz that's what we had to do to pass the test before lunch, but none of us could and then I was tied to a tree stump." Haruki reached out and ruffled the boy's hair as Naruto broke off for air. "Breathe, Naruto-kun. What happened next?" Naruto grinned sheepishly up at him but quickly launched back into the story. "So I was tied to the tree stump as punishment while Sasuke and Sakura-chan got to eat the lunches. Sensei told them they couldn't feed me and then he left, but he came back and passed us when Sasuke and Sakura-chan gave me some of their lunches." The blonde frowned a little and peered curiously up at the redeed. "He told us that those who break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. He passed us because the three of us stuck up for each other. How did you know he would? Haruki's smile faded, absently withdrawing his hand. Perhaps he had revealed a little too much that day. I didn't really, he spoke carefully. But teams can't work well together without teamwork. Most senseis would want to see their genin team have some ability in working together. Naruto still looked a little puzzled, but his expression cleared in the next moment, accepting this explanation easily. Well, I think what you said before you left really helped. Sasuke team's being less of a team and Sakura-chan is being nicer to me. But Kakashi-sensei gets this weird look on his face sometimes. The blonde frowned in concentration and somehow managed to look confused and ticked off at the same time. He also looked a bit like he had been conquered, and Haruki neatly tucked away the amusement threatening to make itself known. And he's only been around an hour late every day. Haruki considered this for a moment. Had he really made that much of a difference? He had only said a few words, but if Kakashi had taken notice of this to the extent that even Naruto had noticed Kakashi's interest, and Sarutobi had even warned him that he would most likely be accosted by the copy nin sometime soon, then the team dynamics of Team 7 must have really changed. All the better, Haruki decided, running a hand through his hair. Team 7 needed to create strong bonds before the Chunin exams, especially Sasuke. Well, maybe I'll see your sensei around soon, Haruki replied aloud. He sounds interesting. I'd like to meet him. That wasn't actually the entire truth. The last time he had seen Kakashi had been over 2 years ago on the battlefield. The man had eventually been overwhelmed by enemy forces where he had been stationed and his Sharingan had burned out. He had fallen at the hands of Madara himself, but not before taking down an entire encampment of Odo nin single-handedly. Kakashi had died in his arms, and his last words to Haruki while choking on his own blood had been an apology for failing to save the Redeed's genin team. Kakashi's death had hit Konoha hard and Haruki even harder. The copy nin had died with regrets, and Haruki had lost another of the handful of people he had been particularly close to. To see him now, alive and healthy and still unmarred by the bloodiest war in all of shinobi history, but not as Kakashi, would hurt. This Kakashi didn't know him, didn't trust him, not like his time's Kakashi whom he had been able to talk to and confide in, and vice versa. In front of him, Naruto was already nodding enthusiastically. Sensei will be coming by tonight. For some reason, he really wants to meet you. Haruki frowned. I guess that's alright. He allowed reluctantly. But I should probably get some rest now. I haven't slept in days. What time is he coming? Naruto rocked back on his heels. He said 8. I don't know if that means he's actually going to arrive at 8 though. Haruki considered this before shrugging and moving to his apartment door. Doesn't matter. I'll be up before then. Just knock on my door when he gets here, alright? Naruto nodded, unlocking his own apartment. Sure. You must be tired after your mission. Sorry for keeping you out here. Haruki waved a dismissive hand as he stepped into his apartment. Don't worry about it, duckling. I'll see you later. He smiled at the wave he received in return before closing the door behind him and stifling a yawn. He didn't really want to sleep. He hadn't wanted to sleep for a long time, but he had felt tired for just as long. He couldn't physically remember the last time his body had been free of the heavy weariness that insisted on making itself at home in his very bones. With a heavy sigh, Haruki tossed his scrolls on the coffee table and placed his shuriken, kunai, and katana aside. Not bothering to change out of his ninja wear or make the trip to the bedroom, the Redeed simply dropped onto the couch, throwing an arm over his eyes, but making sure he would still have a clear view of the front door. A short nap should be alright. If he was lucky, the nightmares would leave him alone for a little while. XXX. Okage-sama, you wish to speak to me? Sarutobi glanced up with a smile as Hyuga Hiashi stepped into the office, quietly closing the door behind him. The Sandaime quickly activated the privacy seals before standing and coming out from around his desk. I did, Sarutobi nodded. I will get right to the point as we may be short on time. You recall the Hyuga affair 9 years ago, of course. The Ashi's already stony countenance shuddered completely. Of course. The affirmation was clipped and cold, but Sarutobi paid it no mind. 8 years ago, the Sandaime continued carefully. He and his Aashi had worked out an abridged version of the recent events before summoning Hiashi to the tower. I sent a spy to Kumo to make sure nothing like it would ever happen again. A week ago, that spy came back, bringing with him some very startling news. The Aashi stiffened at this. Will Kumo try again? Sarutobi quickly shook his head in the negative. No, it isn't that. It seems Kumo has been keeping a secret of great magnitude from the rest of the world and, after my spy relayed the information to me, I sent him back out to retrieve that secret. He has just returned with him earlier today. He paused here, glancing at his private office. I believe showing you would be best. Hisashi-san. Out of the corner of his eye, Sarutobi watched the Hyuga clan head freeze, eyes widening when the small office's door opened and his Aashi stepped out, face calm, but an almost amused gleam in his eyes, mixed with a healthy amount of concern, as the two brothers stared at each other. It has been a while, Nai-san. His Aashi hesitated when Aashi made no move to even speak, only continuing to stare at him, his face having paled considerably. The younger twin glanced wryly at the Hokage. Perhaps you should have told him first, after all. Sarutobi shrugged unrepentantly. He rarely ever saw any of the stiff clan heads acting out of character, and he needed his own way of keeping himself entertained, Hokage or no. Nai-san, it's me. Are you alright? His Aashi stepped closer, and Aashi finally seemed to pull himself together, rounding on the Hokage with a mixture of confusion and anger blazing in his eyes. What is the meaning of this, Hokage-sama? The clan head bit out, jaw tight. This is not my brother. His Aashi died 9 years ago. Sarutobi raised his hand in a calming gesture and briefly considered calling Haruki back to explain, but decided against it. The red was still too thin in his eyes, and the shadows that he had seen on the man's face when Haruki first arrived had only deepened. He hoped some rest would do him good. Aashi-san, I assure you, this is your brother. My spy happens to be adept at Fuinjutsu and has assured me that the coffin your brother was found in had a life suspension seal placed on it. He managed to break the seal and bring his Aashi-san back safely only hours ago. Kumo managed to save your brother's life after realizing what the cage bird seal would do upon his death and has kept him alive but unconscious ever since, while letting the rest of the world believe him to be dead. The Aashi took this in with a heavy frown as he glanced between Sarutobi and his brother. Seeing this, his Aashi stepped forward again and bared his throat, letting the older of the two see the obvious scar marring his skin. I am real, Nai-san, his Aashi reassured softly. And I am back. The Aashi continued staring at his twin, eyeing the scar before glancing at the curse seal that, without a hit I-8, stood out clearly on his Aashi's forehead. The clan head almost stumbled forward a step, unable to look away as if mesmerized. What was the last thing you asked me to do before you took my place 9 years ago? The man's voice was nearly a whisper. His Aashi smiled ever so slightly. I asked you to tell Niji why I chose to take your place. He paused and thought. Though knowing you, you probably have not done so out of some sort of misplaced guilt. He was cut off suddenly when Aashi did stumble forward this time, one hand hovering in front of his younger twin, as if afraid that touching him would prove everything to be nothing but a genjutsu. Mere seconds later, the hand reached out and closed tightly around his Aashi's arm, dragging the startled man into a desperate hug. Several feet away, Sarutobi turned to look out the window to give the two men some semblance of privacy. A smile broke out on his face. It had been a long time since Aashi had shown any outward emotion. He ignored the quiet murmurs behind him as the two Hyugas exchanged words and went over the plan in his head instead. The sound of someone politely clearing their throat behind him caused Sarutobi to turn back, his smile lingering when he saw Aashi standing with his hands at his side once more, his Aashi a half step beside him. Both were compassed again though far more relaxed, and an invisible weight seemed to have been lifted from the Hyuga clan head's shoulders. Could you please explain the circumstances, Hokage-sama? Aashi restarted, voice somehow warmer, while still retaining the neutral formality he typically used. Sarutobi nodded, moving back around his desk. Obviously, the fact that I sent one of my shinobi into Kumo cannot be revealed. My spy came up with a plan that should cover this truth and we, his Aashi-san and I, believe that this is the version we should give the council. Quickly, Sarutobi recounted the plan Haruki had come up with, smoothing over the rougher parts. His Aashi-san will slip back outside the village perhaps 5 to 6 days after Haruki-kun is finished. If we time it correctly, no one will suspect anything. The Aashi mulled this over silently when Sarutobi finished, glancing briefly at his brother again, as he had been every 2 minutes since his Aashi had shown himself. The other two occupants of the room politely pretended not to notice, though his Aashi made the effort to stare back reassuringly whenever Aashi looked over. It is a good plan, Aashi admitted before glancing around the office. Where is this spy now? I dismissed him for the day, Sarutobi revealed. He deserves the rest. What is his name? Aashi persisted. Kazama Haruki, his Aashi provided helpfully. A jounin. Aashi frowned. I have never heard of him. Sarutobi quickly took over again when his Aashi shot a subtle glance at him. Haruki-kun hasn't been back in Konoha in 8 years, and before that, he was one of the newer jounins. All his reports to me have been through his summons. But he showed an aptitude for infiltration, so I sent him into Kumo on this long-term mission. I've personally erased his files so he wouldn't be traced back to Konoha if he were ever caught. As it is, he's done a wonderful job and even brought back an important figure of our village. The Aashi tilted his head thoughtfully, looking between his brother and the Hokage as if suspecting something, But Sarutobi kept his face bland and his Aashi blinked calmly back at his brother. The clan had accepted this knowledge with a simple nod after a moment, though Sarutobi had a hidden suspicion that Aashi didn't entirely believe the story he had spun. Very well, Aashi continued without giving voice to any thoughts he had on the matter. If you believe this to be the best course of action, I will accept this plan. I assume his Aashi will stay here in the meantime. Sarutobi nodded, mildly relieved. Aashi was on the council, and he might have been inclined to inform at least a few other members or decide that revenge against Kumo immediately would be the best course of action. As if sensing his thoughts, Aashi elaborated after a contemplative moment, you have said that this plan was suggested by Kazama-san. I will not accuse you of anything, Hokage-sama, but there is something not quite right about your description of the spy. I keep an eye on all shinobi above genin level, and I have never heard of this man in my life. But it seems as if you feel he needs to be protected from the council, and while this plan gives Konoha an upper hand against Kumogakure, it also conveniently gives Kazama-san a concrete standing in Konoha. If this is so, I will abide by this plan. Sarutobi stared back at Aashi impassively, a glimmer of well-hidden curiosity, prompting him to question, if this were true, you would not question Haruki-kun. Aashi arched an eyebrow. Hokage-sama, you seem to place quite a lot of trust in this Kazama-san. He paused and Sarutobi inclined his head in agreement. That would be my only concern. If you trust that he would not bring any harm to this village, then who am I to call out the man who has given me back my brother? Sarutobi blinked, understanding flashing through him as he nodded thoughtfully. Aashi now considered himself indebted to Haruki. He wondered what the Redeed would think of that. Having a clan head and essentially an entire clan standing behind you could be a powerful weapon. Alright then, Sarutobi spoke briskly now, nodding to his side office. If you wish, you could use my office to catch up on recent years. Both Hyugas bowed quietly, his Aashi quirking a wry smile at him before both brothers disappeared into the office, the door shutting behind them and their chakra signals disappearing instantly. Sarutobi deactivated the privacy seals but did not summon his Anbu back in as he settled down to work again. He decided to call Haruki back tomorrow. The situation wasn't so desperate that he would need to send the Redeed back out when he had just come home. XXX. Naruto perked up when a knock sounded. He glanced at the plastic clock on the kitchen wall. Huh. His sensei was only half an hour late. He was sure this was some sort of record. Hi sensei. Naruto greeted as he opened his door. Kakashi smiled at him but glanced distractedly next door and the blonde wanted to snicker. Why was his sensei so hung up on talking to Haruki? Haruki-san was taking a nap, Naruto announced as he stepped out of his apartment, closing the door behind him before making his way to his neighbor's apartment. But he told me to knock when you came over. Kakashi accepted this without a word, standing behind him in his usual slouch as Naruto knocked on the door. There was a moment of silence before muffled footsteps approached and the sound of a lock clicking open was heard and the door swung open. Immediately, Kakashi stiffened from his place behind his student as his eye met a pair of clear cerulean. The man had the red hair he had been looking out for and he had high cheekbones and a deceptively delicate facial structure that seemed distantly familiar to him, but it was the eyes that drew his attention in the end. A pair of blue eyes, a mix of sky and ocean that Kakashi had only ever seen on one other person. Sensei. Kakashi blinked and glanced down, breaking eye contact with the other jounin to stare inquiringly at his student even as his mind raced. Even Naruto's eyes weren't quite that shade though Kakashi supposed that could change when he grew up. Haruki had a shock of red hair that reached past his shoulders, but why was Kakashi's first impression of the man a jolting reminder of Namikaze Minato? Sensei, this is Kazama Haruki, Naruto introduced proudly, and Kakashi absently noted that the blonde had probably never had the opportunity to introduce anyone before. Haruki-san, this is Kakashi-sensei, the one I told you about. A slightly stilted silence descended on them as Naruto looked between the two in confusion. In contrast, Kakashi was caught up in that blue gaze again, but this time, now that the shock had died somewhat, he could see several differences between Haruki and his former sensei. Haruki had a more slender build. He was by no means feminine looking, but the Redeed's muscles were subtly defined under his ninja uniform instead of the more solid build Minato had had. Kakashi thought the man should have been tanner as well, since the current paleness of his skin didn't quite seem to suit him and leaned towards unhealthy, especially with the faint bags under Haruki's eyes that one could only see upon closer observation. The eye color was the only similarity to Minato that Kakashi could see at the moment, though now that he looked more closely into them, he could see the dark, haunted shadows lurking in them that not even his sensei had had after the war. Haruki was Kakashi's age. What had he seen that would leave darkness like that in his eyes? Who was this man? Haddock-san. The soft tenor snapped him out of his scrutiny and Kakashi instinctively sent an eye smile at the other jounin. Kazama-san, I'm Naruto-sensei, as I'm sure you've heard. I heard you were talking to my cute students and they seemed to take your word to heart, so I wanted to meet you. Haruki studied him for a moment, head tilting in a considering movement as he leaned against the doorframe. Are you angry? Kakashi blinked. Did he seem angry? He was honestly just curious about the redeed. He sighed inwardly. This was what he got for trying to be straightforward. He should just return to being himself. No doubt, it would tick the other man off in no time. With that thought, he whipped out his orange book, ignoring the groan from Naruto as he flipped it open without reservation. No, no. He assured cheerfully as he focused on his precious Icha. Just curious. A long silence followed, and Kakashi could see Naruto face palming over the top of his book. He could also feel Haruki's stare on him, and he glanced up to make sure he hadn't scarred the man too much. Again, he was surprised and could only blink when he caught sight of the definitely fond smile playing on Haruki's lips, a touch of wistfulness now lingering in his eyes. It's nice to meet you, Haruki offered when he saw that he had Kakashi's full, if somewhat bewildered, attention again. The redeed glanced down at Naruto and reached out to ruffle his hair. I've boiled water for ramen. Would the two of you like to join me? Naruto brightened immediately and nodded enthusiastically. Haruki only smiled again and stepped aside to let the blonde in. He glanced questioningly at the copy nin and Kakashi, after a moment of contemplation, nodded. He wasn't in the habit of accepting dinner invitations from near strangers, but there was something soothing about this man's aura that should have put him on alert but only served to relax him instead. Plus, he had wanted to find out more about this man, and there really was no better time than the present. 3/4 of an hour later had both Haruki and Kakashi staring with slightly morbid fascination as Naruto downed his 17th bowl of instant ramen. Ah. I'm full. The blonde finally announced, sitting back as he set down the now empty bowl. Finally. You sure you don't want one more? Haruki and Kakashi glanced at each other, exchanging looks of wry amusement as Naruto pouted at them. In the span of 45 minutes, the two adults had fallen into a quiet sort of camaraderie, exchanging casual words now and then, but comfortable when silence fell between them as they listened to Naruto babble about his training in between slurps of ramen. Kakashi didn't think he had ever taken to anyone so quickly, not even Minato, but the redeed didn't seem to mind his reading material when he brought it out for a while during the meal, nor did he seem at all offended when Kakashi pulled his "I was reading and I was definitely listening to you, but I'm going to pretend I wasn't just to piss you off" routine after Haruki had questioned him on his reasons for being late all the time. Instead, Haruki had only nodded as if Kakashi had actually told the man that he didn't want to talk about it and had promptly done as he wished and changed the subject. But what confused Kakashi the most were the expressions on the redeed's face when Haruki thought the copy nin wasn't looking. When he was supposedly immersed in his Icha, sometimes, out of the corner of his eye, he would see flashes of emotion cross the other Jounin's face. A wistful sort of affection several times, even a desperate kind of fear on occasion, and once, the one that alarmed the copy nin more than any of the other expressions, a deep grieving sorrow when Kakashi had commented offhandedly that he would rather go down fighting than spend any time in a hospital surrounded by nurses who didn't even have the decency to let him keep his reading material while he was there. It had been a joke really, after Naruto had wondered aloud whether or not it would bore him to death if he ever had to spend time in the hospital after a mission. Haruki had flinched minutely at this as if he had been struck, and Kakashi had found himself hastily steering the conversation away after that. Haruki-san, Team 7 took a photo the other day. Naruto was now saying, already on his feet. Do you want to see? The faint half-smile that was already becoming familiar to Kakashi appeared on the redeed's face. Sure. Why don't you go get it while I clear the table? Hey. The blonde scratched his head for a second before smiling sheepishly up at Haruki. It might take a while. I haven't gotten a picture frame for it yet so I put it somewhere in my room. Be back soon. With that said, the boy scampered out of the kitchen, his full stomach doing nothing to slow him down. As Haruki stood up to gather the empty plastic bowls of instant ramen, Kakashi rose as well and pulled over the garbage can before giving the man a hand. Haruki looked faintly surprised but nodded a silent thanks instead, and the two worked in silence until the table was cleared. So what did you say to my students? Kakashi asked when they moved into the sitting room. He noted the Jounin vest thrown over the back of the couch on one end and quickly took the other side of the couch, taking in the katana leaning against a wall in one corner of the room. Haruki shrugged, sitting down as well. Nothing special. I told them to work together. That working as a team would make them stronger and that being able to use your teammates' strengths and being able to cover for their weaknesses as well as letting them do the same for you in return is a testament to how strong you are. His eyes grew distant. I told them that pride and arrogance had no place on a team if it got in the way of protecting your teammates. That those would just be weaknesses in the end. Kakashi stared at the redeed until Haruki actually turned to stare back. The copy nin wondered idly if Haruki had Sasuke in mind when he had given that last piece of advice. "You'd make a good sensei," he finally said, not bothering to hide the respect in his voice at the obvious sincerity that had been in Haruki's words. He didn't expect the frown that appeared after he spoke. "I wouldn't," the Redeed voiced with quiet certainty. He seemed about to say something else before suddenly closing his mouth again, eyes sharpening, and in the sudden silence, the two jounins heard a faint crash of broken glass next door. Haruki was on his feet and at his door in a flash, Kakashi only a step behind him. Outside, Naruto's door was open, and jeering voices could be heard. A sharp crack of skin on skin reached their ears. "Got some new things since we last visited, eh demon? Trash like you shouldn't waste space like this. It's too good for you. You don't deserve to get your murdering hands on such good merchandise." The man who had spoken bent down to pick up a plate off the ground that hadn't broken yet. He was just about to throw it when steel-like fingers curled around his wrist and, in one decisive twist, broke it without effort. The man screamed, plate slipping from his hand only to be neatly caught as the intruder spun around, clutching his arm and backing up to stand with the other two that had come with him. "You bast." The words died in his throat, air freezing in his lungs when he met an icy gaze, pinning all three men in place with cold efficiency. Behind Haruki, Kakashi quickly moved to the blonde crouching wide-eyed in a corner of the apartment, an ugly bruise already blossoming on one cheek. With his lips set in a thin line behind his mask, the copy nin crouched down beside his student, doing a quick scan for any other injuries and breathing a small sigh of relief when he found none. Seeing Naruto's attention completely focused on his red-haired neighbor, Kakashi too turned back to Haruki, staring dispassionately at the three intruders cowering in front of the Redeed. He couldn't quite bring himself to pity them. Haruki was currently exuding a frigid rage, tightly reined in, but curiously enough, his body was still relaxed. Moving Naruto to the side, Kakashi just managed to catch a glimpse of the Redeed's face and had to suppress a shudder. While Haruki's visage remained deadly still, it was the eyes that seemed to bring the most fear to the men in front of him. Unforgiving and ruthless, the usual cerulean had darkened to a near twilight blue, almost demonic in its nature. "Get out." The order, for it could be mistaken for nothing else, had not been shouted, nor had Haruki snarled at them. In that even, calm tone Kakashi had grown used to earlier that evening, the only difference being the impassive steel that now edged his voice. Haruki had the men scrambling for the door, giving the Redeed a wide berth. "If you or any of your friends ever come back," Haruki's voice, still soft, froze the men in their tracks again as they reached the door. Bottomless Indigo turned to stare at them. "I will hunt you down, and you will only live long enough to regret every action you ever took against this boy." Haruki held their gazes for a moment longer, letting the promise sink in. And then the Redeed blinked and the spell broke, and the men were gone a fraction of a second later, fleeing the apartment building as if the devil itself was at their heels. It might as well have been, Kakashi thought with satisfied amusement, visible eyes studying the figure still facing away from them before glancing down at Naruto. The blonde was staring open-mouthed at the Redeed, and Kakashi suspected that there might even be stars in the boy's awestruck eyes at the moment. "Naruto." Haruki suddenly barked and the blonde jumped from his spot. "Why yeah? Do you know what Fuinjutsu is?" This question was so completely off-topic that even Kakashi blinked in confusion for a moment. Naruto scratched his head. No. "Doesn't matter," Haruki snapped, finally turning around. The ice had melted from the man's eyes, leaving only a protective ferocity behind. "You'll learn one day. For now, I'll maintain the seals on this place." But that said, the Redeed stalked out of the apartment, leaving both Naruto and Kakashi to scramble after him. XXX. "You know Fuinjutsu?" Kakashi eyed the Redeed with new interest as he leaned against Naruto's counter, studying the intricate symbols Haruki was currently writing out with a skilled, steady hand. On Haruki's other side, legs swinging in the air, Naruto was perched on the counter, peering at the Redeed's work. The bruise on his face was already fading, and Kakashi knew it would be gone by morning. Haruki replied without looking up. "I picked it up over the years." It was obvious to Kakashi that Haruki did not want to speak further on the subject, so he dropped it without another word. "Perhaps another time." "If you know Fuinjutsu," Naruto chimed in. "How come you can't teach me?" Earlier, after the intruders had fled, Haruki had given the blonde a simplified run-through of what Fuinjutsu was and what the protection seals he was currently making would do. "I could make ones that could set those bastards on fire," Haruki had explained nonchalantly as he glanced at Kakashi, "but your sensei over there is duty-bound to protect the citizens of Konoha, so he would have to report me." Kakashi had refrained from asking why Haruki wasn't duty-bound to protect the citizens of Konoha and report himself and could talk so easily of setting them on fire. The small demonic light in the Redeed's eyes when Haruki had mentioned said citizens, as fiercely protective as a mother over her child, had convinced him that Haruki wouldn't care. Frankly speaking, Kakashi wouldn't care either, but he didn't feel like getting a dressing down from the Sandaime, so he had kept quiet. He figured if they ever managed to get to Naruto again, seals would be the least of their problems when he and Haruki got through with them. Naruto had readily agreed to the seals and had been asking questions non-stop since Haruki had started. Haruki paused briefly at the question, brush hovering above the piece of paper for a second before continuing. There are better teachers out there. And I'm not teacher material. Naruto pouted. You gave Sasuke, Sakura-chan, and me. And I, Haruki corrected automatically as Kakashi watched on. And I, Naruto repeated obediently. A lesson before Kakashi-sensei arrived that day. And they both listened. And we've been doing really good on our missions because of your advice. Right, sensei? Kakashi nodded with no small amount of amusement when Haruki reached out and flicked the blonde on the forehead, straightening from the seal as he put down his brush. Doing really well on our missions, duckling. The redeed corrected gently. And like you said, all I did was give you advice. I didn't teach you anything. Naruto only pouted some more, but couldn't stay annoyed when Haruki picked up the small stack of now finished seals. What now? The blonde asked inquisitively, jumping down from the counter. Kakashi followed them, hands stuffed into his pockets. It had been a long time since he had seen a Fuinjutsu user at work. Now we just placed them around the apartment. The door, of course. They stepped outside and Haruki slapped one on either side of the door, discharging a small amount of his chakra into each of them. The symbols on the paper flashed an electric blue before dissipating from the paper. For a moment, once the paper was removed, the same symbols could be seen on the actual wall of the apartment. They shone brightly in the night before they too disappeared, but Kakashi, extending a tentative hand forward to touch the ordinary-looking wood, could feel the steady hum of power under his fingers. He turned back to Haruki, keeping quiet since he was sure he wouldn't be able to keep the amazement out of his voice if he spoke. Most Fuinjutsu users stuck seals, paper and all, to a surface, and the chakra placed into it would keep it activated and in place. Kakashi knew of only 2 other people who could transfer seals directly from paper to the actual object with so little effort. The Yondaime and the Toad-san in Jiraiya. Did this mean that Haruki was as good as either of them? The way the redeed had spoken about it earlier. Kakashi had thought that Haruki only knew enough to get by. Anyone wanting to do harm will be thrown back before they can get within 10 feet of this doorway, Haruki announced, sounding satisfied. If they don't get a clue the first time and try again, they'll get electrocuted and then thrown back. If they still don't get it, they'll die. Kakashi cut in dryly, arching an eyebrow at the redeed as he listened with growing amusement. Haruki looked highly unimpressed. Fortunately for them, no. I put a transportation component into the seal. They'll be dumped in the Naka River if they try a third time. Kakashi was very grateful for his mask at the moment since he couldn't help the grin that surfaced on his features. As it was, the laughter that no doubt showed on the visible part of his face caught Haruki's attention instead and the redeed smirked in response. Shaking his head, the copy nin pointed out, won't they need to go to the hospital once they get electrocuted? Haruki waved a hand as he headed back inside. When I say electrocuted, I mean that's how I'd like to imagine it in my head. In reality, they'll only get a nasty shock and, if they're smart, go home with mild burns. Otherwise, they'll risk pneumonia. Naka River's still cold this time of the year. And if they try again after that? Haruki stopped, glancing briefly down at Naruto who blinked curiously back up at him before focusing on the copy nin now leaning lazily against the doorframe. I don't think they will. Kakashi smiled knowingly at Haruki. He had spent almost 2 hours now in the redeed's presence and knew, if nothing else, that Haruki was a very careful man. Careful people were dangerous people since they were prepared for almost anything. They had contingency plans for contingency plans. Haruki glanced sharply at the copy nin before continuing in a steely voice, there is also a gravity component in the seal. It will hold them to the ground until I release them, and by that time, I will know, and I will come and deal with them myself. Kakashi cocked his head, studying the redeed carefully as the man turned to face the nearest window. He had not yet seen Haruki fight, but he imagined it would be both amazing and terrifying. The unyielding resolve in Haruki's voice rang true, and from experience, Kakashi knew men like that were dangerous to face on a good day. They were downright suicidal to go up against on a bad day. His former sensei had been like that, and Kakashi had seen enemy nin literally flee for their lives at the first sight of an enraged Yondaime. Hell, they had run when Minato hadn't been angry. Watching Haruki now though, with the redeed listening attentively to Naruto as his student babbled on excitedly about the first time they had chased Tora around Konoha, actually listening when others would have nodded disinterestedly and tuned the boy out, Kakashi could only wonder why. Naruto had said that he had only met Haruki when the Jounin had returned from his mission 5 days ago, and only briefly. Yet, even in the short time Kakashi had interacted with him, Haruki had shown himself to be unnaturally protective of Naruto, threatening intruders and setting up seals for the boy, as if it was his responsibility to do so. Haddock-san, Naruto wants to try his hand at activating a seal. His sensei should get his mind out of the gutter and come over and watch. Kakashi blinked and opened his mouth to protest the accusation when he noted the teasing glint in the other Jounin's eyes. He closed his mouth again and scoffed quietly, whipping out his book in retribution instead. As Kakashi now expected but still didn't understand, Haruki only smiled fondly at him without a single trace of annoyance marring the expression. Inwardly sighing, the copy nin slipped his book away again and tried not to sulk. It was no fun if the other party didn't get mad, though he couldn't quite muster up any real annoyance towards Haruki for this either. "Ma, call me Kakashi." Kakashi drew closer, glancing down at the seal now placed on the coffee table. "Haddock-san makes me feel old." "You're old, sensei." His student retorted, and Kakashi frowned down at Naruto, about to remind the blonde that Haruki was the same age before glancing back sharply at Haruki again when the retard chuckled. There was nothing special about the action itself. Naruto had given a witty reply and anyone with a sense of humor would have laughed. It was the sound though. Because for one short painful pitiful moment, Kakashi could have sworn it had been Minato standing there, chuckling at something Obito had said. Kakashi stared for a moment too long though, and he immediately regretted it when Haruki seemed to realize something had disturbed him. The humor died from his face, and his eyes grew wary again. Kakashi hadn't even noticed that the shadows that he had first observed in Haruki's cerulean eyes had lifted sometime during their dinner until now, when they settled back in place like they had never left. Kakashi felt like kicking himself. But Haruki spoke again as if nothing had occurred, and his voice was still mild when he replied, "You can call me Haruki then, if you want." Kakashi nodded hesitantly and then had no more time to think when Naruto, already impatient to begin with, reached out with one hand touched the seal. Before any of them had a chance to react, the seal literally started to smoke before a flash of chakra nearly blinded them and the paper seal promptly disintegrated, along with the part of the table that it had been lying on top of. All three were silent as they stared at the pile of ash and blackened wood on the ground. Was that supposed to happen? Kakashi asked mildly, finally breaking the silence as he glanced sidelong at the other Jounin. Haruki's face remained impassive for all of 2 seconds before his lips twitched upwards and amusement entered his features again. Kakashi smiled triumphantly. A smile was better than nothing, especially since he had been responsible for ridding the earlier humor in the first place. As if realizing he wasn't in trouble for damaging the coffee table or getting it wrong, Naruto's face split into an embarrassed grin, rubbing the back of his head. "Sorry, Haruki-san." Haruki shrugged. "It happens. That was a seal for creating sparks for a campfire. You just put too much chakra into it." Almost as an afterthought, he added, glancing in Kakashi's direction, "You could start your team on chakra control exercises. It would help all of them in the long run the sooner they get started on it." Kakashi nodded thoughtfully. "I'll get them started tomorrow. Sasu could do with some training of that sort too, but I think chakra control comes easily to Sakura." Naruto had brightened with the thought of new training, and Kakashi was distracted by the hyperactive blonde now trying to wrangle what the exercise would be out of him, so much that he almost missed the look of grim satisfaction that flashed across Haruki's face. "Almost, but not quite." Kakashi said nothing though, and filed this new information away into a corner of his mind that he had set aside for all the things that didn't make much sense about Kazama Haruki. He would think on it later. The rest of the evening was spent placing up the seals. When they were finished, Haruki had taken one look at the clock and ordered the blonde to shower and get to bed. Kakashi had snickered quietly on the side when he realized what a mother Haruki could be. The redhead only shot him a dirty look before bidding the blonde goodnight. Now, standing in front of Haruki's apartment door, both with their hands tucked away in pockets, Kakashi glanced at the quiet redhead and decided to try for one more round of questions and answers. He glanced behind him at Haruki's door. "Does your apartment have seals too?" An almost evil grin appeared on the redhead's face for a moment. "Of course, but nowhere near as harmless as the ones I put on Naruto's place. If you had come to my door with the intention to do me serious harm, the seals would have electrocuted you 6 ways to Sunday. And yes, this time, when I say electrocuted, I mean electrocuted." Kakashi tried not to look too disturbed as he edged away from the seemingly innocent-looking doorway. They fell into a companionable silence again, and Kakashi wondered if Haruki knew he wanted to ask the redhead questions, and that was the reason he wasn't being ordered to go home just yet. Deciding to simply speak his mind, he thought back to Naruto and decided to start with his student. "Not that I think it's a bad thing, but why are you helping Naruto so much?" Haruki tilted his head just enough to observe him out of the corner of his eyes. "Why shouldn't I? He's 12, he lives alone, and his place gets broken into every other week. What kind of person would I be if I didn't help him? Kakashi said nothing, wondering if his student's place really did get broken into every other week, and if so, how Haruki would know about it. You broke someone's wrist, Kakashi reminded dryly. That's a lot of anger for someone as calm as you are. Haruki snorted. You wouldn't believe the temper I had when I was young. Young, not younger, Kakashi noted. I used to get annoyed at everything, though I calmed down pretty quickly too, probably because of my short attention span. Not anymore though. No, Haruki agreed, and something weary and strained entered his expression as he turned his gaze onto the night sky. Not anymore. I used up most of my anger a long time ago. Kakashi frowned but let the matter go. Haruki would probably clam up if he pushed it any further. You didn't report me for breaking a civilian's wrist. Haruki was staring at him out of the corner of his eyes again. Kakashi snorted. Even if I wanted to report you, do you really think the Sandaime is going to do anything about it? He can't watch Naruto all the time, but he treats him like his own grandson. He'd be furious with the civilians. Haruki nodded in agreement. True enough. Kakashi contemplated his next thought for a moment before asking, do you want to join our training session tomorrow? Naruto would be happy, and I'm sure Sasuke and Sakura would be happy to see you too. Haruki cast a dubious look at him. Sasuke? Really? Well, maybe not happy, Kakashi amended. Interested. Not grumpy. Could definitely care less. You can pick. Haruki's mouth tilted up in another small smile, but shot him a suspicious look this time. I hope you're not trying to pawn your students off on me, Haddock. I already told you I'm not teacher material. Kakashi attempted a mildly offended countenance. I would never try to pawn my cute little students off on anyone. The humor in his eye faded somewhat. But I don't agree that you wouldn't be a good teacher. Haruki arched an eyebrow at him. You've never seen me teach. Kakashi stared pointedly at him. Not an hour ago, you just explained basic Fuinjutsu theory in a simple but clear enough way that even Naruto understood it. A sharp lance was thrown his way. Naruto will become great at Fuinjutsu. The absolute certainty in Haruki's voice threw Kakashi a little, but he managed to reply lightly, careful not to let his tone be mistaken for mockery, got all that after he put a hole through his own coffee table, huh? As he hoped, a slight smile appeared on the Riteed's face again, and the tension that had gripped the man's shoulders released its hold. I'll think about it, Haruki finally allowed. I think the Hokage will want me to report to him in the morning to discuss my recent mission. I've been resting long enough. But I'll see if I can come by sometime afterwards. Kakashi nodded but couldn't quite help asking one last thing. You haven't really been in Konoha for the past week, have you? He got an impassive stare for his troubles but didn't stop pushing. His ego was on the line here, damn it. I'm a tracker. My dogs are trackers. We're the best. But I couldn't find you, which means that you weren't here. Right. Another heartbeat of silence and then soft clear laughter rang out in the night air, brilliant in its genuineness. On the outside, Kakashi was stunned as he watched a face in front of him come truly alive for the first time since he had met this man. On the inside, he was downright thunderstruck. If he had any doubts before, they were all gone now. This Kazama Haruki, whoever he was, had Minato's laugh. The copy nin couldn't quite help the smile that curved his lips as his posture relaxed again. He didn't care what anyone said. Haruki was not a jounin sent to Kumo as a spy 8 years ago. He didn't know the real story and he definitely planned to find out, but even with all the secrets Haruki coveted, Kakashi also knew he could trust this man. There was no way the Riteed could be an enemy nin. Not if he could laugh like that in the presence of someone he had known for all of 2 hours. And yeah, it hurt a little to hear Minato's laugh come from this strange shinobi, but that feeling was dying even as he thought this. Instead, he found himself wondering what had happened to Haruki for the Riteed to lock away this laughter, this happiness, what had happened to hide this man away, so that Kakashi was only now getting a glimpse of what Haruki might have been or could have been, and what it would take to draw this man out again. And to keep him here instead of hidden away behind the distant melancholic weary soldier that Kakashi had first met. But for now, this was enough, and as Haruki's laughter died away, fading to a contented smile instead, Kakashi only smiled back lightly. So does that mean you weren't in Konoha? Haruki grinned and headed into his apartment. Good night Kakashi. I'll see you around. Kakashi raised a lazy hand. Night then. Come by training ground 7 if can. A nod and then the Riteed disappeared, door closing quietly behind him. Kakashi remained motionless for a while longer before heading towards his own home, his steps lighter than usual, even for a shinobi. That had been an interesting evening. He could honestly say he had not had so much fun in a very long time. He absently wondered if Haruki would ask him over for dinner again. Maybe he could bring Sasuke and Sakura too. That would be all of Team 7. As he continued to muse over the things he had learned that night and made plans for tomorrow's training, Kakashi didn't notice that his mind had already unconsciously placed Haruki with their team. Chapter 4 People take notice. But only Aashi-san knows. This question was directed at both Sarutobi and his Aashi as Haruki glanced between them, arms crossed. He had been summoned by the Hokage at 6 in the morning and had spent the past 15 minutes being filled in by Sarutobi about yesterday's conversation after he had left. Sarutobi nodded. He has agreed to the plan. We will execute this before telling the council. Haruki nodded and then glanced over his shoulder when a muffled knock sounded. Is that him? I asked him to come. We will need to finalize the plan. Sarutobi raised his voice. Come in. The door opened and Aashi stepped in. Immediately, Byakugan eyes clashed with cerulean as the clan head studied Haruki with careful intensity. Haruki only stared back impassively, rising slowly to his feet before dipping his head in a sign of respect. Not a full bow though. He didn't care what time he was in. He didn't bow to anyone anymore. Aashi closed the door behind him and the privacy seals settled again. He nodded a greeting at his brother and bowed slightly to the Hokage, but his gaze was ultimately drawn back to the red-haired jounin standing in the room as he listened to Sarutobi's introduction of this man as Kazama Haruki, the spy that had brought his brother back. There was a puzzling weariness to this man's stance and Aashi's eyes lingered on the color of his irises. A distant memory tugged on him, but he couldn't quite place it. A mild frown made its way onto his face. Those eyes reminded him of someone, but it was just out of reach when his mind tried to grasp it. He dismissed the thought, leaving it for another time, and studied the rest of the jounin instead. There was no doubt about it. He had never seen this Kazama Haruki before. There was no way he could have forgotten such bright hair on a jounin or even a chunin. Aashi recalled the respectful nod he had received upon his arrival. A nod, not a bow. This man was proud in the quiet sort of way Aashi approved of most. And instead of looking down while in a clan head's presence, Haruki stared right back, not challenging him, only acknowledging him. So Aashi returned it. He nodded back, returning the jounin's strong gaze with an equal one of his own. I believe I have you to thank for the safe return of my brother, Kazama-san. I and the Hyuga clan will be forever thankful for what you have done. Haruki blinked once, tilting his head to one side as he tried to adjust to this Hyuga Aashi. The one in his time, the Aashi he had gotten used to, had dropped most of this formality, and while his words had still been spoken with all the polite upbringing of nobility, that Aashi had also been blunter. Haruki could get away with a simple "you're welcome" to Aashi's straightforward "thank you," and vice versa. Well, he had never learned how to talk like a noble. He wasn't about to start now. You're welcome, Aashi-san-sama. Haruki replied plainly, ignoring the inquiring quirk of one of the noble's eyebrows when Aashi caught his slip. I was happy to help. Aashi stared at him for a moment longer before the Hokage coughed quietly, drawing their attention back to Sarutobi. The Hokage said nothing, keeping his expression neutral, but his Aashi's features were edged with faint amusement as their somewhat stilted exchange came to a halt. Now then, Sarutobi said briskly, turning to Haruki first. Your plan is good, but there are a few holes in it. Aashi-san mentioned earlier. The council will want to know why we did not immediately inform them when you came home with his Aashi-san. Aashi-san has come up with a solution. The Aashi took his cue and explained, his Aashi is part of the Hyuga clan and thus he can be considered clan business. Hokage-sama's first action after you relayed the information to him a week ago would be to inform me. As the Hyuga clan head, I can choose to withhold this information from all outsiders and deal with the issue in accordance to my own wishes as long as it will not jeopardize the village. The other clan heads will accept this explanation without question and the rest of the council knows not to interfere with clan affairs. Haruki stared hard at Aashi before pointing out flatly, you'll be lying to the council. Aashi didn't so much as blink. Yes. Haruki observed the calm resolve in Aashi's eyes before shrugging. Sounds good to me. But, he turned to take in all three of the room's other occupants as he continued. Danzo won't fall for it. He may not challenge it right away, but you can be sure he'll be getting some of his root to look into it. Immediate silence descended on the room as his Aashi straightened in his chair and Aashi turned to look sharply at him. Sarutobi simply stared. Root. Haruki frowned at the sudden tension in the air before realization flooded him. Eyes widening, he blurted out, old man, you cannot be serious. Both Hyugas looked a little startled at his outburst, but Sarutobi only shook his head. I know Danzo is still in command of a few nin whom are loyal to him, but what you are implying. Haruki almost glowered as he looked between the three occupants. He finally opted to close his eyes for a moment. I honestly don't even know where to start. He muttered darkly. Opening his eyes again, he caught the two Hyugas exchanging an unreadable look before turning back to him. Haruki-san, his Aashi started quietly. Whatever information you can reveal to us here, you have the word of both myself and Nai-san that we will not question your information source, nor will anything of what is spoken here today leave this room through either of us. Haruki eyed them doubtfully for a moment. You realize you are placing a lot of trust in someone neither of you actually know. I could be an enemy nin, for all you know. I do not believe that, his Aashi immediately denied. Haruki scowled at him. Of course you don't. The Aashi inclined his head. My brother has informed me that he has good reason to trust you. I believe him. Haruki sighed and glanced at Sarutobi. The Hokage shrugged and nodded at him. It is your choice, Haruki-kun. Iridiid frowned at him before staring past him out the window. After a long moment of consideration, he started slowly without looking at any of them. Danzo doesn't just have a few nin loyal to him. He has an entire army. Haruki ignored the uneasy quiet behind him. Root was disbanded under the Yondaime, but Danzo kept it together in secret. It isn't as big as the Anbu troops, but they're well-trained soldiers. Weapons. Danzo made sure to lock their emotions away. They have a curse seal on their tongue which will paralyze them if they try to speak about Danzo, so you can't interrogate them. Haruki finally turned back to the others, observing the faint shock on each man's face. True to their word, neither Hyuga asked how he had gotten this information, exchanging a few words and frowns between them instead, as Sarutobi leaned back in his chair and digested this. Do you know where Root is hidden? Aashi spoke up. Haruki considered this for a moment. He knew where the future location would be, but he hadn't even known about Root in his timeline at this age, and Danzo was damn paranoid on a good day. There was no way their base would still be in the same place. No, not right now. He finally settled on a compromise and saw a flash of understanding cross both Sarutobi and his Aashi's face. Again, Aashi glanced at his brother and said nothing more on the subject. It does not matter, Sarutobi cut in. You don't have any personal files. I will tell them that I had them destroyed before you left for Kumo. Danzo will make enquiries. Haruki pointed out. There aren't his gaze flickered to Aashi. There aren't many people who know me anymore. Sarutobi rested his chin on clasped hands as he stared thoughtfully at the Iridiid. I believe your old team was killed on a mission. He said eventually. Several of the other shinobi of your generation died as well. I don't believe you ever interacted with the other jounin of your age currently in the village before I sent you out on the infiltration. Haruki didn't even bother glancing at Aashi this time. That's flimsy, old man. That would never hold against Danzo. Does that matter? Sarutobi asked pointedly. You kept to yourself and have been gone from this village since you were 18. Who can dispute anything? The only thing the other jounin around your age will say is that they do not remember you. There are shinobi from my days that I do not remember. Haruki threw up his hands in exasperation, forgetting himself for a moment. Yes, old man, but unlike you, I can't claim senility. A muffled cough made Haruki turn and he just managed to catch his Aashi hide a smile behind his hand. Beside him, Aashi's face was determinedly neutral, wide eyes blank as he stared ahead. Haruki turned back to the Hokage, only to be faced with an annoyed glare. Blinking, Haruki just shrugged unrepentantly. Sarutobi sighed, shaking his head. It is the best we have. Should worst come to worst, we will handle Danzo then. For now, it is enough to put him off. Besides, he will be more interested in his Aashi-san's return than anything else. Haruki nodded reluctantly. Danzo would become a major problem eventually, and from experience, Haruki knew he would be a huge pain in the ass. Moving on then, Sarutobi inquired. Are there anyone else in the council you believe will prove a problem? Haruki paused to consider this before shrugging. Well, you can pretty much expect Shikaku-san to not believe a single word, but I don't think he'll say anything. Sarutobi frowned thoughtfully but nodded for the Iridiid to continue. Inoichi-san and Chiauza-san won't kick up a fuss about it even if they suspect something. Those two other council members, Kaharu and Homura, they probably won't suspect anything until Danzo updates them and then they'll back him completely. Again, Sarutobi nodded. He hadn't expected anything else from those two. And the civilian representative is in Danzo's pocket so he'll go with whatever Danzo wants. Finished, Haruki fell silent to observe the others. Aashi and his Aashi were talking between themselves again, having frowned when Haruki had mentioned the civilian representative. Sarutobi was taking this in much more easily though, waiting patiently for the Hyugas to finish their exchange. I will keep this information in mind, Sarutobi finally spoke again. For now, we need to finalize our plan and execute it before too much time passes. Haruki-kun, I want you to leave tomorrow morning. How soon can you get to Kumo and destroy the shrine? A day and a half. The Aashi's eyebrows shot up in surprise but made no comment. Alright, 3 days is the average time a nin can get from Kumo to Konoha. Factoring in rest time for his Aashi-san, we will stage his return 4 days after the explosion. For those 4 days, I will pretend to send you out on a simple information gathering mission to Kase no Kuni. Haruki nodded. On my way back, I can henge into his Aashi-san and let a few people glimpse me. Rumors would start up that way. Saratobi nodded in approval, but his Aashi leaned forward with a sudden thought. One last thing. Wouldn't I be quite a bit weaker once I break the seal? How exactly would I manage to blow up a shrine? Haruki shook his head. When seals are deactivated properly like they should be, there would be no damage to anyone or anything around it. But when a seal is broken by force because it has become weak or someone managed to overpower it, it can cause quite a bit of damage. He paused and noticed he now had a captive audience. Take the life suspension seal for example. Most human beings, even if they are on the verge of death, all struggle to survive for even just one more minute. That is every average human's most basic instinct. To survive, to live. Even under a life suspension seal, the body is slowly dying. Much more slowly of course, but still dying. If that seal slips, the body will automatically start struggling against it. It's instinct. As the body struggles, because the seal is still keeping most of the body's functions alive but blocked off, chakra will begin to build up. The seal is like a dam, the chakra build up like a raging river. Water is patient, water can wait. Chakra is the same. Eventually, the dam will burst if not fixed, and like that dam, the seal would also break. After that, I think you can imagine what would happen. There was blatant interest in both Hyuga's faces and, almost like a student at the academy, his Aashi promptly answered, the chakra would explode outwards. And a buildup of chakra like that could destroy a small area. Haruki nodded. Exactly. All I'll have to do is release a burst of chakra strong enough to take out the shrine. Easy enough. It was Aashi who spoke this time, his question directed at the Hokage, even as his eyes remained on Haruki. Hokage-sama, yesterday, I believe you informed me that Kazama-san is adept at Fuinjutsu. His stare grew thoughtful. You do not explain Fuinjutsu theory like someone only adept at the art, Kazama-san. Haruki frowned. That was the simplified version. I mean, I can recite scrolls to you. Rai the one who taught me gave me the scrolls. Aashi shook his head. That is the point. Most novices and even some experts can only recite theory word for word. They are proficient enough at the practical aspect, but if they try to teach others, they simply give them scrolls to learn from. You can talk about it as if you were teaching a class. Haruki stiffened a little, glancing between the two Hyugas. That's how I learn. He finally said. I've never been good with academics. I graduated from the academy at the bottom of my class. And I used to have a very short attention span. When I am handed large sections of text to read, I lose all interest. But I wanted to learn Fuinjutsu so I compromised. As long as I understood it and I could explain it clearly to someone else, my sensei told me I wouldn't have to memorize it. Eventually, I did memorize all the scrolls, but that took years longer for me. The Aashi nodded thoughtfully, but it was his Aashi who spoke. Have you ever considered teaching Fuinjutsu? This was obviously the wrong to say and Haruki's face blanked. No. The two brothers glanced at each other before nodding simultaneously, saying nothing more as they turned back to the Hokage. Saratobi glanced sidelong at the Redeed with something like concern, but didn't either. Very well then. We're done here. And I'm running late. I should be handing out missions right now. I'll come with you. Haruki reached into a pocket and withdrew a hair tie, quickly sweeping his hair into a simple ponytail, leaving jaw-length bangs to frame his face. Both Hyugas immediately frowned, another memory tugging at them, but staying just out of reach. Before either could say anything, Saratobi voiced curiously, eyeing the flak jacket he had given the Jounin earlier that week, as well as the dark long-sleeved shirt underneath, matching trousers, and calf-length sandals. Will you be training today, Haruki-kun? Haruki nodded curtly. Kakashi wants me to join his team for the day. Ah, he caught up to you then. Saratobi chuckled, rising from his seat. Minutes later, Aashi was heading back to the Hyuga compound, as Aashi had retreated into the Hokage's private office, and Saratobi and Haruki were both heading to the mission assignment room. This is a good opportunity to let the other Jounin see you, Saratobi remarked as they drew closer to their destination. I believe you would know Asuma, Kurenai, and Guy. Haruki nodded distractedly, steeling himself for another meeting with people he had seen die. He glanced at the Hokage walking beside him and, recalling some of the things Asuma had mentioned in passing to him and Shika before his death, suggested quietly, you should make up with Asuma. He may seem indifferent to the rift between you two, but he does care. He just doesn't understand you, and he doesn't know how to try. Saratobi actually faltered a step as Haruki spoke, but recovered quickly enough that Haruki could pretend it hadn't happened. The Hokage was silent until they reached the mission room. At the door, Saratobi laid a gentle hand on Haruki's arm. The Redeed paused, turning to look questioningly at the older man. Saratobi only smiled. Thank you. I will try. Haruki cleared his throat uncomfortably, nodding jerkily before opening the side door and motioning for the Hokage to enter first. Inside, Haruki immediately caught sight of the familiar senseis of Team 8, 10, Guy, and, shockingly, 7. They all glanced up and straightened when the Hokage walked in, their gazes immediately drawn to the Redeed walking a step behind Sarutobi. Haruki? All eyes turned to Kakashi next. The copy nin had actually taken the time to look up from his book and his visible eye was watching the Redeed curiously. Haruki smiled a greeting. By your standards, you're early today, Kakashi. Kakashi shrugged, stowing his book away and moving forward, ignoring the odd looks he was receiving from the other senseis. I was over half an hour late. You and Hokage-sama are even later. Haruki shrugged without concern before glancing at Sarutobi who was watching the entire exchange with far too much amusement. Or rather, he was watching the other sensei's confused expressions as they watched the exchange with far too much amusement. Kakashi never acted this way with anyone. Sarutobi idly wondered what had happened yesterday for the two to seem completely at ease in each other's company. And again, Haruki was Naruto, and he had always thought Naruto could get to anyone if he tried hard enough. The Hokage quickly handed out the day's missions, painting a fence, mowing a field, weeding, and patrol duty for Team Guy, before he nodded a goodbye to Haruki. After this, he wouldn't see Haruki again for several days. As they left the mission room, Haruki walking beside Kakashi to peer down at the mission scroll Kakashi had in hand, the other three senseis immediately drifted closer, all of them eyeing Haruki curiously. Who's your friend, Kakashi? Kurenai was the first to speak, features friendly as she faced Haruki. Kakashi glanced at them before patting the Redeed on the shoulder. Ma, this is who I was looking for earlier. Kazama Haruki. You're the one that had Konoha's famous copy nin running around on a wild goose chase. Asuma peered at Haruki with interest. Haruki offered a small smile and nodded as Kakashi's eye twitched. Yes. I guess Kakashi just kept missing me all week. Here, the copy nin muttered something that sounded insistently like you weren't here. I just came back 5 days ago from a pretty long mission. As Asuma nodded thoughtfully, Guy bounded up, already beaming. Haruki-san. To best my rival in his area of expertise, your springtime of youth must shine brightly in you. Kakashi had whipped out his book the moment Guy had opened his mouth, while Kurenai was already face-palming as Asuma sighed on her left. Give it a rest, Guy. Kurenai chided. You're going to scare him off. At least introduce yourself first. Without waiting for the spandex-clad jounin to respond, Kurenai turned to Haruki and offered a welcoming smile. Hi, I'm Yuhi Kurenai, sensei of Team 8. Turning to gesture at Asuma, who nodded cordially, she continued, this is Sarutobi Asuma, sensei of Team 10. Before she could say anything more, Guy leapt in, and I'm Mido Guy. Everyone calls me Konoha's sublime green beast of prey. Haruki chuckled, much to the consternation of the other three jounin and Kakashi quickly cut in, Guy, no one calls you that. You only introduce yourself to other people like that in the hopes of scarring them for life. I just flashed a white-teeth grin. My eternal rival. There is no reason to be jealous simply because you do not have a name as cool as mine. In this time of spring, all shinobi are in the springtime of their youths and thus will discover their own names for themselves. Kakashi had already gone back to his book and now glanced up from it, visible eye disinterested. Huh? Did you say something? I took on an affronted countenance and watching them, Haruki couldn't help but smile wistfully at the banter. Kakashi had died before Guy and the optimistic jounin had never been the same after that. No matter how much Guy ranted at Kakashi and Kakashi pretended to ignore him, the two had been good friends. Oh. That was so hip of you, Kakashi. But you should listen to me. He turned to Haruki, eager to prove his point. Spring is the best season for one to blossom into true beauty. I prefer autumn myself. I looked appalled at this, even as the other three looked on, dubious expressions on their faces as Haruki continued the conversation. How could you? Spring is the stage of life where every ninja starts to grow their roots. We can show our springtime of youth to the world as we begin to flourish. Haruki nodded, absently turning his gaze to a nearby window to catch sight of the clear morning spring sky as his voice turned regretful. Yeah, but once we reach autumn, we've led a successful enough life that we've managed to see half of it. An abrupt silence fell around them and Haruki turned back to see all four jounin staring at him in surprise. The Redeed shifted minutely as he realized that no one really understood Guy's diatribes, at least not before the first several dozen times. It had taken himself a few years to pick up the subtle insinuations behind the blaring words. As it was, Guy was now staring at him almost thoughtfully, a rare somber expression shaping his features. Haruki hated it. That expression had become far too common during the last years of the war. As it was though, Haruki was careful to keep his face blank. Guy was much more observant than most people gave him credit for. A second later though, the spandex-clad jounin had reached out and clapped him on the shoulder, grin splitting his face again. Yosh. I've decided. Your springtime of youth is indeed exceptional. I would like you to meet my team. They will be delighted to meet such youth. Honestly, Haruki couldn't imagine Niji delighted to meet anyone, especially at this age, and he quickly turned the offer down as he motioned to Kakashi. Sorry Guy-san, but Kakashi's already invited me to train with his team. Perhaps another day. I immediately rounded on Kakashi, pointing accusingly at him, even as Kakashi heaved a deep suffering sigh. My eternal rival works swiftly when the result is worth it. Very well. You win this round, but… He rounded on Haruki again. Tomorrow, you will train with us, Haruki-san. I insist. Haruki paused briefly, considering the option of leaving a cage Bunshin behind, but dismissed the idea. Sarutobi had already given him a reason to be out of the village, and it wouldn't be fair to Guy's team. I'm afraid I am busy tomorrow. Hokage-sama is sending me out on a mission. Kakashi glanced at him. So soon? He asked casually. Haruki hid a smirk. It has been 5 days. Kakashi scowled. He didn't believe the Redeed had been in the village since the beginning of the week. It just wasn't possible. I looked disappointed but perked up again when Haruki continued, I'll join your team for a training session as soon as I'm free once I get back. Is that alright? The Jounin flashed another blinding grin at him. Of course. I will hold you to your word, Haruki-san. His eyes flickered to the window as well before waving his mission scroll in the air. Now, I must be off. It is not very youthful for the sensei to be late. He shot a pointed look at Kakashi, who expertly ignored it before jogging away, waving a hand in the air. They all watched him go before Kurenai turned back to Haruki. You actually held a conversation with Guy when he's like that. I wish I had your patience. Haruki smiled lightly. He's easy enough to understand if you just ignore the youthfulness. Kurenai and Asuma both chuckled at this, and Haruki turned to elbow Kakashi. Come on sensei, Haruki's hand shot out and snatched the orange book out of Kakashi's surprised grasp. You're the one who invited me and I am not going to be late. He nodded to the other two Jounin while holding the book out of a glowering Kakashi's reach before shining away. Kakashi disappeared a moment later, hot on his heels. Asuma and Kurenai blinked before glancing at each other. Have you noticed, Kurenai remarked. Recently, Kakashi's been a little different. Not as late as usual, Asuma agreed. Because of him. Haruki. Kurenai shrugged gracefully before the two started for the door. Maybe. But did you see Haruki-san when he grabbed Kakashi's book? I didn't even see his hand move. And Kakashi couldn't stop him. Asuma nodded contemplatively. He must be really fast. And he got Kakashi moving. His genin team might get collective heart attacks when he shows up on time. He scratched his head. Maybe I should invite Haruki to train with my team. They could definitely use the motivation. I'd like to see what he can do. Kurenai announced. He seems kind of interesting. But it's weird that none of us seem to know him. Asuma just frowned, glancing briefly in the direction where he knew Team 7 trained. That was strange. And now that he thought about it, he hadn't been able to sense Haruki's chakra signal at all, even when they were standing together. Not many could hide their chakra so well, and even less did it in their own village when they were amongst friends. XXX. I stared thoughtfully in the direction of the Team 7 training grounds as his team started on their taijutsu sets. There weren't many who actually knew what he was talking about underneath all the drama he thought was definitely necessary to brighten the world. Especially not the first time. Guy had been impressed when Haruki had offered his own opinion on the matter. Still, there was definitely something off about the Redeed. For one, Guy hadn't missed the depression that had surfaced briefly on the other Jounin's face when he had said he liked autumn. That had actually been part of the reason why Guy had immediately offered to drag Haruki to training with them. The depth of that sorrow had troubled him greatly and he hadn't wanted to leave the Redeed alone so soon after that. And for another, where had this man come from? Guy was sure he had never seen the red-haired Jounin before. Perhaps he had changed his appearance. But surely he would have at least recalled the name. Sensei, are you alright? I blinked before smiling winningly down at his only female student. Of course. My youthfulness would not allow me to be anything but. Tenten rolled her eyes but smiled good-naturedly and returned to her katas. Further away, Lee was challenging Niji to a youthful contest of who could do more high kicks and Niji was simply ignoring him but still doing said high kicks with deadly accuracy. I smiled broadly at his three students, putting thoughts of the mysterious Jounin into the back of his mind for the moment. They were almost ready. He would be entering them into the Chunin exams this year. XXX. Good morning. All three genin straightened from their warm-ups and spun around to blink at the approaching red-haired Jounin. Naruto was the first to speak up, greeting Haruki enthusiastically. Morning, Haruki-san. Naruto chirped brightly. Behind him, Sakura scowled at the blonde but bowed a little in the Redeed's direction and greeted him shyly. Good morning, Haruki-san. Haruki nodded at the Kunoichi, studying the more healthy flush to her cheeks. She hadn't developed much muscle yet and there was still some baby fat here and there, but Haruki could see she was eating more regular meals now. He turned to the last genin of the group and nodded a greeting as well. Sasuke stared back at him with consideration before nodding as well. He seemed to contemplate something for a moment before finally asking politely, "Haruki-san, would you be willing to spar with me?" Haruki tilted his head thoughtfully, absently pushing a few stray locks of hair out of his eyes. He glanced back towards the village. Kakashi had managed to snatch his book back a minute before they had reached the training grounds and had disappeared to Kami knows where. It would be a while before the copy nin showed up. He turned back to the waiting Uchiha. "Are you finished your warm-up?" Sasuke immediately nodded, moving away from Naruto and Sakura before getting into the standard Uchiha-style Taijutsu stance. "Not fair." Naruto complained, crossing his arms. "Why does Sasuke team get to spar with you? Kakashi-sensei never spars with any of us." Haruki smiled faintly down at the blonde. He asked, "Naruto. If you want, I'll spar with you afterwards." Naruto brightened at that, nodding readily as Haruki moved to stand opposite to Sasuke. Haruki shrugged his shoulders a few times before nodding at Sasuke. "Whenever you're ready." The Uchiha darted forward a second later, lashing out with a fist to Haruki's abdomen. Haruki immediately blocked it before jumping smoothly over the follow-up sweep of Sasuke's leg. Haruki frowned faintly when an entire second passed as Sasuke drew back into a ready position before lashing out again, a series of punches and kicks that Haruki easily blocked or pushed aside. This was very boring. Dodging a kick that came from the side, Haruki started pushing back, blocking a fist and reaching out to tap the boy's left shoulder, adjusting a slightly wayward palm thrust before tapping at a rib, and then finally twisting effortlessly past the boy and tapping him on the back of the neck. Sasuke finally jumped back a few feet away, obvious frustration flashing across his face. Haruki held up a hand to momentarily halt the boy. "Sasuke, your moves are predictable." Haruki motioned vaguely at the boy in general. "Improvising." Sasuke frowned heavily, wiping away beads of sweat that had gathered on his forehead. He seemed about to snap something back but stopped, watching the redeed carefully as he mentally reviewed the spar so far. On the side, Naruto was bouncing on the balls of his feet while Sakura shouted encouragement. A moment later, Sasuke rushed forward again, starting with another fist to the abdomen, but instead of dropping to the ground to sweep out the redeed's feet after his punch was blocked, the Uchiha used his other hand to balance on the ground and kicked his feet up to lash out at Haruki's jaw instead. Haruki easily dodged it but smiled inwardly. For some reason or another, Sasuke was listening to him. So, instead of just mostly blocking or dodging the next rain of blows the genin sent his way, Haruki started adjusting the strikes the boy used. Pushing a fist a little to the left one time and gently nudging a hip into a better alignment during a high kick another, he slowly mended some of the holes in the genin's fighting style. Sasuke seemed to realize what he was doing and accepted it wordlessly, continuing to throw punches and kicks at the jounin. Finally, panting hard but still determined, Sasuke leapt away and into the air, quickly bringing his hands together to form the seals for a jutsu as he started falling back to the ground. Kaiten. Kakaku no Jutsu. Haruki had already recognized the signature hand signs and now quickly danced away, the fireball soaring harmlessly behind him even as he felt the heat stream past. The fireball quickly faded away and Haruki turned to look down at Sasuke who was gasping for breath as he rested his hands on bent knees. But Onyx's eyes met his evenly and there was a certain amount of defiance in them as he stared back. "Sasuke team. You cheated." Naruto bounded forward, Sakura a step behind, already reaching out to bop Naruto on the head. "Sasuke-kun didn't cheat." She glanced hesitantly at Haruki. "He didn't, right Haruki-san?" Haruki glanced briefly at the two other genin before looking back at Sasuke. He remained silent for a few seconds and wondered if the boy would look away. He didn't. Satisfied, Haruki jerked his head a little and the hair tie that had been holding back his hair snapped, having been too close to the fireball to escape damage. Haruki watched him passively as all three genin stared wide-eyed when the hair tie fluttered to the ground and crimson locks fell around his shoulders again. Waiting until he caught Sasuke's gaze again, Haruki offered him a single nod and a faint smile of approval. "Much better, Sasuke." The raven-haired genin straightened at the praise, eyes lighting up as a pleased smile tilted his lips for a moment. Haruki glanced at Naruto with an arched eyebrow. "Naruto, I didn't say no ninjutsu there is honor in battle, but we are ninja and most of what normal people would consider underhanded, we call it fair game. And in a real fight, there are no rules. Your enemies will not abide by any standards you set. Understand?" The blonde nodded, frowning hard as he digested this, and Haruki turned back to Sasuke. "Cool down with some katas and drink some water." The redeed withdrew a scroll and unsealed a bottle for the boy. "From now on, try developing your own fighting style. Your clan style is a good foundation to build up from, but you'll need more variation if you want to strengthen your taijutsu." Sasuke nodded attentively before sketching a half-bow, respect flickering in his eyes when he looked up again. "Thanks, Haruki-san." Haruki managed a small nod but almost reeled inside as he heard the genuine gratitude in the boy's voice. He couldn't recall Sasuke ever thanking anyone at this age. Then again, he had been the dead last back then. Sasuke was hardly going to thank him. "My turn now, Haruki-san." Haruki smiled and nodded, glancing at a nearby tree as he waited for Naruto to finish a quick stretch. He had sensed the copy nin's presence a moment before his spar with Sasuke began, and he now wondered what Kakashi was trying to do by letting Haruki spar with his students. "Lazy bastard," Haruki muttered under his breath as Naruto got into position in front of him. "Not going to pawn your students off on me, my ass." "Ready, Haruki-san?" Haruki studied the blonde with concealed amusement as the boy couldn't seem to stop moving from excitement. "Whenever you are." Immediately, Naruto brought his hands together and Haruki really did smile at the familiarity of it. Page Bunshin no Jutsu. 7 clones appeared around them, all holding kunai, and Haruki cocked his head and glanced around before focusing on the real Naruto again. "Come then," he voiced, letting a challenge edge his tone. "Let's see what you can do." All 8 Narutos grinned and charged, simultaneously lashing out with their kunai as soon as they reached the reed. Haruki dodged the swipes without difficulty, noting the wide sweep of each reckless strike. "Clumsy, Naruto," he called out as he continued to avoid the kunai. "Don't just swing at my closest body part." Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Sasuke draw closer to their spar before restarting his katas again. That just wastes both energy and time. Aim at openings. If your opponent doesn't have openings, then make one. He ducked a rather wild swipe of a kunai from one of the clones before flipping back, balancing on one hand as his left leg came up, catching said clone under the chin and throwing him into the air. Following through, he twisted his body as his right leg came up as well and caught the clone from the side, neatly tossing him away and sending him crashing into the trunk of a tree. The clone disappeared in a puff of smoke as Haruki righted himself again and watched the remaining Narutos back away. "Make an opening." The Naruto near the back scratched his head. "How do I do that?" "Surprise me," when Naruto still looked confused, Haruki clarified. "Do something unpredictable, Naruto. You're good at that. Play to your strengths." Another moment of thought passed before a wide grin grew on the blonde's face. "You asked for it." He called out almost gleefully as he brought his hands together. "Aremu no Jutsu." Sakura immediately began yelling as 6 Narutos turned into beautiful naked blonde females. Haruki caught a glimpse of Sasuke wheeling around to face the other direction and heard a faint spluttering sound from the tree Kakashi was still sitting in. Grinning, he shook his head as he felt the real Naruto run at him from behind. Dodging at the last minute, his hand reached out and snagged the boy by the collar before tossing him neatly into the group of female clones. "Good distraction, Naruto," Haruki called out cheerfully. "But that won't always work. You need to follow up on it if it doesn't." "I know." Haruki's gaze slid to the side as another Naruto came charging at him, leaping into the air with his kunai drawn. So the boy had made more cage bunshins behind the smoke his earlier jutsu had produced. Haruki smiled even as he sidestepped the bunshin and flipped him to the ground face first where it dispersed. Good. Naruto was learning. 3 more cage bunshins came up from behind, but Haruki caught 2 of them with quick sharp jabs to the abdomen before flipping away from the third. The bunshin followed him though, hands balled into fists as he charged the reed. Haruki glanced briefly at the ground as he balanced on his hands and quickly swiped up a familiar item, snapping it towards the bunshin. The clone reeled backwards when the hair tie hit him between the eyes, and Haruki quickly took the opportunity to swing around and sweep the clone's feet out from under him. Straightening again, he noted that the female clones had been dispersed, but the Naruto clones were still going strong. There were nearly 24 of them in the clearing now, scattered around in a loose circle around him. "We've got you now." One Naruto shouted as they all charged with childlike battle cries. Haruki sighed, tucking a few stray locks of hair behind one ear as the clones descended on him, some coming from the air, others charging at a flat-out run. With the ease of someone who had done little save train, eat, sleep, and fight in open battle, Haruki launched into a counterattack, executing his own punches and kicks to disperse the clones one by one. Up in his chosen tree, Kakashi observed the spar, unable to look away. This was the first time he had seen Haruki fight, and the grace and strength in each action had him mesmerized. Even earlier, during the spar with Sasuke when Haruki had chosen not to fight but to only silently fix the holes in the Uchiha's fighting style, Kakashi hadn't even pulled out his book. The way Haruki had adjusted each stance or punch had Kakashi wondering if Haruki had ever taught before. Now, the copy nin absently speculated whether or not Haruki would agree to spar with him sometime. Kakashi suspected the reed had yet to show even half of his real skill into jutsu, and he wanted to see how far he would have to push the other jounin for him to show his true strength. Leaning forward even more, he squinted suddenly, picking up some familiarity in the somewhat odd style Haruki was using. Wasn't that the Hyuga clan's gentle fist style? Haruki wasn't closing off any Tenketsu points, but he was definitely targeting certain areas with deadly precision. Where the hell had Haruki learned the Hyuga's prized Taijutsu style? And it wasn't just the gentle fist. Haruki used a mix of martial arts, all molded together to form the unique style he now used with easy efficiency. There was the graceful stance and direct but subtle palm thrusts that Kakashi was sure was a variation of the taijutsu the Uchiha clan used, and as Haruki danced out of reach of the Naruto clone's attacks, Kakashi could also see bits and pieces of the taijutsu that the Nara clan usually stuck to, as well as. He leaned forward even further, ignoring the fact that he would have probably toppled out of the tree by now if he hadn't been a ninja. That was definitely the unique style only guy knew and taught to that equally disturbing protege of his. The Redeed had just pulled off Konoha Senpyu that guy used and had created. But Haruki had just met Guy this morning. There was no way he could know that. Down below, Haruki finished off the last of the clones with a series of high kicks that sent all three Naruto lookalikes into the air, tumbling away head over heels and dispersing before they could hit the ground. Whirling around, he caught the fist that had been aimed at his back and with a gentle but deft twist only strong enough to throw the blonde off balance and spin him around, Haruki had Naruto's arm neatly pinned behind him as he flipped out a kunai and finished the spar by tapping the flat side of the weapon against the boy's left shoulder. "I believe this match goes to me," Haruki said mildly as Naruto craned his head around to scowl up at him. Smiling slightly, he released the blonde and Naruto scrambled up, shaking out his arm as Sasuke and Sakura approached them. "You're crazy strong, Haruki-san," Naruto complained as he flopped onto his back, blonde locks damp against his forehead. Sasuke came to a stop beside them and toed the blonde. Dope. You need to get faster." Naruto glared up at the Uchiha, swatting away the genin's foot. "Shut up, team. I already know that." "Naruto." Sakura had her hands on her hips and was scowling down at him. "Don't be so rude to Sasuke-kun. He's giving you good advice." Naruto huffed sulkily before sitting up and peering at Haruki who had unsealed another water bottle and was now holding it out to the blonde. Naruto grinned and took it, downing half the bottle in one go. "Good job, Naruto." Haruki sank down to a crouch in front of the blonde. "Your use of Kage Bunshin is excellent. What you need to work on now is polishing up your taijutsu and, of course, increasing your speed. Right now though, I'm more concerned about your fighting style. You don't follow the standard style the academy teaches, and while that's good for keeping your attacks unpredictable, it also means you don't have a very strong foundation." Naruto frowned, glancing up at Sasuke who was listening just as intently. "The senseis show awesome stances in the standard style," Naruto admitted, rubbing the back of his head. "But we usually have to learn from the scrolls they give us." He made a face. "I don't like sitting all day studying." Sasuke snorted while Sakura just sighed, but Haruki nodded instead. "That's alright, not all shinobi learn best by studying. You're better at learning by doing, right?" At Naruto's immediate nod, Haruki stared thoughtfully at the blonde before glancing up at Sasuke. "Sasuke, if you were the one fighting Naruto earlier, what would have happened?" The Uchiha had an instant retort at the tip of his tongue. I would have won." Haruki arched a challenging eyebrow even as Naruto protested loudly. "With no trouble." Sasuke's curt nod seemed to stall halfway through the motion as he glanced briefly down at Naruto. Then, with obvious reluctance, he admitted grudgingly, "I might have had some trouble defending against all the Kage Bunshins." His second jutsu, Haruki hid a smile at the boy's obvious embarrassment at this. Would have been distracting as well, but it would be his clones that would be dangerous since they can come at all sides. Haruki nodded. "How would you have defended against it then?" Sasuke cocked his head, a faint frown making its way onto his face. "I would have used my fireball jutsu to get rid of most of them. Because his taijutsu is sloppy, I would be able to dispatch any remaining clones by myself." Haruki nodded again and turned back to Naruto. "And you, Naruto? If you had been fighting Sasuke, what would you have done if he had countered by doing this?" Naruto scowled, striking an unconscious thinking pose as he dropped his chin in one hand. "I would have made more clones to distract him." Blue eyes suddenly sharpened slyly as he glanced up at his rival. "And then, while he was busy with them, I'd attack from his left side, from behind." Haruki's eyes narrowed as Sasuke started slightly. "Oh? And why would you do that?" Naruto grinned brightly as he pointed at Sasuke's left leg. "You hit Sasuke team 3 times their back when you were sparring with him. His left side is obviously not as well defended as his right side, and his leg should be at least bruised from the spar. It's a weakness." Sasuke scoffed loudly but subtly shook out his left leg. Haruki smiled in approval. Naruto really did learn better by watching doing things hands-on. "Good observation, Naruto. In battle, every weakness should be exploited." He rose to his full height again, eyeing them both thoughtfully before nodding decisively. Train together, he advised, much to all three genin's surprise. Both of you have weaknesses that the other can see through. Sasuke is more disciplined and has a better grasp of his own actions when he attacks, but Naruto has better instinct and he's good at improvising when he gets into tough situations. You can help each other improve in different areas. I think you'll find a spar between you two interesting. The two boys glanced at each other, curious but trying not to show it at the same time. Haruki smiled a little, ignoring the sadness that welled up inside him. In his timeline, Sasuke had been his favorite sparring partner. Every spar they had managed to fit in before things really went to hell had been truly enjoyable. Alright then, I've talked enough. Haruki turned to blink at the last of Team 7's genin. Sakura, would you like to spar? The kunoichi blushed a little, hands wringing uncomfortably as she glanced at Sasuke who was suddenly concentrating on drinking more water. Maybe not right now. I don't think I'd do very well. Before Haruki could respond, Naruto, with his usual amount of non-existent tact, piped up, come on, Sakura-chan. It'll be fun. Sasuke team and I couldn't win either. But you could learn some things. Naruto. Haruki cut in, and Naruto's mouth closed with a click at the redeemed sharp tone, blue eyes wide when he caught sight of Sakura's rapidly reddening face. That's alright, Sakura. Haruki drew her attention again before she could lash out at the blonde. Actually, it's probably best that you don't spar right now. Kakashi has an exercise for all of you that I think you'll do especially well in. You'll probably move on to more advanced stuff today, and you'll need your energy for that. Sakura blinked up at him in confusion, though she seemed a little relieved at the change of topic. What exercise? Oh yeah. Naruto scrambled to his feet, dusting his jumpsuit off. Kakashi-sensei said we were going to learn chakra control today. When did he say that? Sakura rounded on the blonde. Naruto grinned. Yesterday, after we had dinner with Haruki-san. Both Sasuke and Sakura turned to look at Haruki, who shrugged, trying not to scowl at his younger counterpart. Kakashi wanted to meet me, Naruto invited him around, and we all ended up eating at my place. Without waiting to hear what either of the other two genin thought about this, Haruki hurried on, turning to stare directly at the tree Kakashi was still sitting in. Speaking of Kakashi, why don't you come down and actually teach, sensei, or have you decided to just sit on the sidelines for the rest of the day? All three genin peered in the direction Haruki was looking at, and a second later, Kakashi dropped out of the tree, orange book in hand as he strolled towards them. Yo. You're late. Naruto and Sakura snapped as Sasuke looked on. This time though, none of them seemed particularly upset by the Jounin's tardiness. You were here all along too. Kakashi smiled at them and waved his orange book at them. Well, I was in the middle of a great chapter. Miki-chan seduced. He got no further than that before Haruki flipped out a kunai and eyed his orange book menacingly. Not in front of minors, Kakashi. Kakashi chuckled nervously and quickly tucked his book away. Behind Haruki, Sakura and Naruto were making faces, and even Sasuke looked faintly disturbed. Well, I suppose we should get started on our training session today. You guys still have a D rank to finish afterwards. Follow me. As the three genin trailed after Kakashi into a more forested area of the training grounds, Haruki fell into step beside him. You've been watching since I started sparring with Sasuke, he commented. You could have come out sooner. Kakashi shrugged unrepentantly. It was interesting to watch. He paused to glance sidelong at the redeed. You knew what you were doing. Have you ever taught before? Haruki predictably stiffened and remained silent, gaze focused ahead. Once, he finally revealed without looking at the copy nin. A long time ago. And only for a little while. Kakashi nodded and said nothing more. He knew he probably wouldn't get anything else out of the redeed if he continued to push. Now then, the group had come to a halt at the base of three moderately tall trees. You three are going to climb a tree. Climb a tree, sensei. Naruto's face fell as he glanced at the trees in front of them. How does that help? Climbing a tree without using your hands, Kakashi amended before moving forward to demonstrate. To the side, Haruki tuned the copy nin out as he explained the concept to the three genin. He moved a little ways away where the trees were farther apart and scanned the small clearing. He could still see Team 7 from here and it was big enough for his jutsu. Returning to the others, he noted the mild annoyance on the two boys' face as they gazed up at Sakura, who was already sitting on one of the upper branches. Good. Quietly, he moved to where Kakashi was standing, drawing the Jounin's attention. Kakashi, may I teach Sakura how to walk on water? The copy nin turned a puzzled eye on the redeed. I don't mind, but Naka River's pretty far from here. Haruki shook his head. I have a jutsu that Sakura can use to practice with. Kakashi's eye lit up with interest. I'll come too. The boys are probably going to be at it for a while. Haruki nodded and moved away, coming to a stop at the base of Sakura's tree. Sakura, he called up. You're pretty good at climbing trees already. If you want, I can teach you how to walk on water next. Perched on the branch, Sakura brightened a little. She had thought Haruki was only being nice when he had told her earlier that she would be good at this exercise, but it came pretty easily to her. She wasn't sure if he would really teach her something else since she had turned his offer down the first time, but the Jounin now waited patiently for her reply. Okay, she called down, concentrating chakra at her feet again before descending the tree. She jumped the last several feet and shot the Reed a surprised smile when he automatically reached out to steady her. He nodded back and motioned for her to follow him. You can do it, Sasu-kun, she called out encouragingly as she passed the other two. Pausing, she added fairly, you too, Naruto. She felt Haruki's eyes on her and glanced up in time to catch a startled look passing over his usually neutral features, but the Reed looked away again before she could ask. Sakura-chan, where will you be going? Naruto's tone was tinged with envy and even Sasuke looked over at her. Flustered as she didn't really know, Sakura glanced up at Haruki again as he answered. Just over there, he nodded to a small clearing a short distance away. I just need a bit of space to use my jutsu. Sakura could practically feel the excitement emanating from the boys and she could admit to a little curiosity herself as she accompanied the two Jounin to the clearing. Stepping away, Haruki brought his hands up and went through a long series of seals. Suiton. Kagami no Mizu. The air in front of the Jounin seemed to waver before a swirl of white chakra extended across the clearing, a thin plane of light briefly lighting up the area and then fading away again as the quiet sound of rippling water reached their ears. In front of them, a thin plane of water that took up the entire clearing but was only perhaps an inch thick floated about a foot above the ground. Drawing closer, Sakura's eyes widened as she realized that it was indeed a lake, quite literally, bottomless lake. Ducking her head, she swept her hand under the flat plane of water and found nothing but empty air beneath it. Mystified, she turned to face the red-haired Jounin even as Kakashi stepped up beside her to peer into the water. Sasuke and Naruto had completely abandoned their trees and had hurried over as well, enchanted by the jutsu. Impressive, Haruki, Kakashi commented, dipping a finger into the water and setting off a ripple effect. How deep is this? Haruki shrugged, stepping up beside them and looking pleased that he seemed to have caught their interest. I have no idea. I've never tried to touch the bottom. But how? Sakura stammered, dipping a hand into the clear lake. The water was cool against her skin. Besides the occasional ripple caused by some invisible wind that Sakura knew wasn't real, because the wind that ruffled her hair was blowing in the opposite direction, the water was the clearest of blues. It was the most beautiful lake she had ever seen. It's a combination of water ninjutsu and space-time ninjutsu. Haruki explained. Basically, it's a dimensional pocket filled with water. Why water of mirrors? Sasuke inquired from the ground, having dropped into a crouch and was trying to stick one hand into the lake from underneath. Said hand passed completely through the plane of water, dry and untouched. Haruki pointed at the sky. It reflects the weather. Have you noticed the wind? It's blowing east today, but the ripples in the lake are moving west. It's a calm, sunny day, so the lake is calm and clear as well. His mouth twisted into an odd smile. In a storm though, this lake becomes a typhoon. That is so cool. Naruto crowed, looking about ready to dive in. Before he could move though, Kakashi's left hand had dropped onto his head and his right onto Sasuke's. Alright you two, Kakashi announced cheerfully. Back to work. You're supposed to be climbing trees. This lake is for Sakura right now. Visibly sulking, Naruto stalked back towards his tree, throwing longing looks over his shoulder as he reluctantly moved away. Sasuke lingered as well, a scowl etched on his face as he headed after Naruto. Both looked determined to master climbing trees before the day was out or die trying. Alright Sakura, Haruki turned to the pink-haired Kunoichi. It's the same concept as climbing a tree, but water is always moving, so you'll find balancing that much harder. Give it a try. Sakura nodded resolutely and placed a foot on top of the water, testing the surface as she made sure her chakra coated her feet evenly. 3 small wobbly steps later, a particularly large ripple threw her off balance, and she dropped into the lake with a loud splash. Spluttering as she came up again, she caught Haruki's gaze and felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she clung to the thin edge of the lake. Hey, a hand dropped on top of her wet locks as the stern voice made her look up. None of that. You got 3 steps, Sakura. When I first started, I couldn't even get 1 step without soaking myself to the bone, and that was after I half killed myself learning how to climb a tree. A giggle slipped out before she could stop it and Sakura glanced apologetically up at the Jounin, but Haruki only grinned back at her, amusement clear in bright cerulean. Your chakra control is near perfect so if anyone can get this down in a day, it's you. Now get back to work. I didn't summon a lake just to give people pep talks. This drew a grin from her even as Haruki stepped away and she used the edge of the lake to heave herself out of the water to try again, confidence restored. Her chakra control was pretty good, not to mention Haruki did seem to think she could do it, and the jounin had yet to be wrong about anything. She was going to learn how to walk on water by the end of the day if it killed her. Retreating from the lakeside, Haruki settled himself against a tree and found himself joined by Kakashi a moment later. "My students are going to be demanding a switch of senseis by the end of the day," the copy nin told him mournfully. Haruki just rolled his eyes. "Don't sell yourself short, Kakashi. Just pay them all equal attention and push them a bit." Kakashi tilted his head to study him. "You handle them pretty well." Haruki shrugged. "They remind me of my old team." Kakashi glanced across the clearing as Sakura fell in again. "Your students?" Haruki frowned and shook his head. "No. No, my team. The team I was on." "Who would you be then?" Kakashi asked lightly, cautious of the Redeed's reaction. Haruki's mouth twitched up into a bitter smile. "Like Naruto, I guess." Kakashi mentally compared the two. One quiet, the other loud. One patient, the other brash. One calm, the other hot-tempered. But both friendly enough. Both unpredictable. And both charismatic. "I can see that," he nodded, only to be met with a sad smile. "You shouldn't," Haruki said quietly, tilting his head back to set his gaze on the morning sky. "I never want to see him turn out like me." The frown crept onto his face as Kakashi studied the Redeed. It was clear right now, but no matter where he saw Haruki, yesterday in his apartment, back in the mission assignments room, even during the spars with Naruto and Sasuke, a shadow of something dark and unhappy always seemed to cling to the jounin, never letting go. "I'm rambling again," Kakashi blinked when cerulean eyes turned back to him and Haruki rubbed the back of his hand, much like Naruto, he noted. "I still do that, now and then. Sorry." Kakashi shrugged, eye smiling at him to assure the Redeed that he didn't mind. The sadness still remained though, so he subtly led the conversation in another direction by nodding at Sakura. The kunoichi seemed to be able to walk 6 or 7 steps or so before slipping a bit, but she didn't completely fall in anymore. "So I'm guessing that jutsu is yours." Haruki smiled a little. "Yes. I created it several years ago." "And you know space-time ninjutsu?" It was not a question. Haruki med noncommittally. "Some." Kakashi arched an eyebrow. "You said that about Fuinjutsu." Haruki shrugged. "It's true." Kakashi gave him a flat stare. "You transferred those seals from paper to wall with a drop of your chakra. Most people who know some Fuinjutsu can't even get it off paper." "I practiced a lot. And I suppose I have a knack for it." Kakashi just shook his head and glanced back at the lake. He was itching to try out this jutsu and was now kicking himself for keeping his Sharingan hidden earlier. "Would you like to learn?" Kakashi glanced over and scratched his head sheepishly at the amused smile on Haruki's face. "Ah, well, you went through quite a lot of seals earlier. Use your eye then. I'll go through them one more time." Kakashi started, turning sharply to face the Redeed. "How did you know?" he finally asked. Haruki's mouth pulled up into a grin that never reached his eyes. "I know everything, Kakashi." Abruptly, he pushed off of the tree to face the copy nin. "So do you want to learn?" Kakashi studied him for a moment longer before nodding silently and reaching up to uncover his eye. He wasn't sure what Haruki meant, but it wasn't as if it was a great secret either. He was called Konoha's copy nin after all. As soon as his Sharingan focused on Haruki's hands, the Redeed quickly went through the seals again and Kakashi memorized them, making a mental note to start practicing the jutsu as soon as he had some free time. Space-time ninjutsu was nothing to fool around with in a real fight if he didn't actually know how to use it properly. "Thanks," Kakashi said as Haruki finished. He quickly hit his Sharingan again and the two were soon back to observing Sakura practice her chakra control. "You give out your jutsus pretty easily," Kakashi remarked after a short silence. Haruki chuckled. "I've got more in my arsenal, Kakashi. That jutsu I just showed you was one of the earliest I created." "How old were you when you made it?" 16. Maybe 17. Kakashi snapped his head around at this. "You made a water and space-time ninjutsu combination when you were a chunin." Haruki opened his mouth as if to refute this, but closed it again and settled on a stiff nod. There was a strange look on his face now, but it was gone when Kakashi blinked. "But I've never seen enemy nin use it before. Surely someone would have been able to figure it out and copy it eventually," Kakashi pointed out. Haruki shrugged. "All the enemy nin I used this jutsu against aren't in any condition to try to reproduce it." Kakashi blinked before nodding reluctantly. He supposed that made sense, but he had a feeling he was missing something here. There was a sudden yell from the trees and both jounin turned to look as the sound startled Sakura enough that the kunoichi went under again. By the trees, Naruto seemed to have made it halfway, lost concentration, but had somehow managed to transfer chakra to his hands and was now hanging from a side branch by his palms. Kakashi sweat dropped. "That's different," he commented, watching the blonde flail in midair as he contemplated whether or not he should give his student a hand. "I've never seen that happen before." Haruki smirked, leaning back against the tree again. "Leave him. He'll figure out how to get down on his own." Kakashi shrugged and settled back as well. "You have a lot of faith in him. With you in jutsu and this." Haruki turned to glance at Naruto, who would no doubt become Hokage one day. At Sasuke, who would become Anbu General and Naruto's trusted second. And at Sakura, who would be Naruto's head medic and the occasional nudge to keep the blonde focused. "I have a lot of faith in all of them." Haruki turned a smile on Kakashi, less shadowed and more genuine. "They'll be great one day." XXX. 3 hours later found Haruki walking through the village, having parted ways with Team 7 a few minutes earlier. Sakura could finally walk across the lake without falling in, though she still wobbled almost drunkenly every few steps. Naruto and Sasuke had managed to reach one of the topmost branches of their respective trees, but had yet to actually stick there for longer than a few seconds. At that point, Kakashi had announced that it was time to do their D-rank mission, and all three had reluctantly stopped their training. But while the boys had been smudged with dirt after all the times they had face planted back to earth, at least they were both still completely dry. Sakura on the other hand had been soaked from head to toe and highly embarrassed as she shivered next to her teammates. Haruki and Kakashi had taken one look at her before they had each picked up one of the boys and promptly dumped them into the lake. Naruto and Sasuke had surfaced quickly, one shouting while the other glared, but Sakura had started laughing, even as she had made a valiant attempt to look sorry. All three had been ordered to go home for a change of clothes before meeting up again for their mission, and Haruki had excused himself for the rest of the day, explaining that he still had a few errands to do before his mission tomorrow. All three children had had varying degrees of disappointment etched on their faces, but Kakashi had nodded and wished him good luck on his mission before ushering his students away. Now, Haruki found himself walking a familiar route down a side street to where one of his future students lived. In his timeline, he hadn't met Kisaragi Yasuke until the boy was 12 and he was 18 and saddled with a genin team by the Godame. It had taken one look for him to realize that the boy was being neglected and a grand total of 3 weeks to remove the boy from his home and into Haruki's. Up ahead, Haruki caught sight of a familiar head of dark brown near black hair, walking hand in hand with a tall man with similar features. Haruki stiffened but kept his distance. Yasuke had eventually told him that the negligence and occasional abuse had only started after his mother had died in a house fire. Before that, his father had been a good man and as good a father as anyone could ask for. Judging by the 6-year-old smile as he listened to his father speak, the mother probably hadn't died yet, which meant that Yasuke still had an opportunity to keep his family intact. Haruki couldn't take the kid if there was nothing wrong. Weighing his options, he decided it was better this way. Yasuke was 6, not 12, and Haruki wouldn't be able to stick around as much. He wasn't a sensei anymore and he would probably need to leave the village from time to time. He wouldn't have time to look after a child on top of everything else. Mind made up, Haruki quickly summoned a small orange-furred fox. "Stay out of sight and follow them," Haruki ordered softly. "Protect them. Make sure nothing happens to any of them." The fox dipped his head to show he had understood before trotting away, disappearing into the hedges of a nearby house. Satisfied, Haruki turned and walked away. Perhaps, in 6 years, this time's Naruto would become a sensei again. And perhaps the Godame would see fit to give him the same 3 genin she had given Haruki in his time. XXX. "Welcome." Haruki nodded a greeting at the smiling shop owner as he stepped into the bookstore. He hadn't actually been planning to stop by this place, but his feet had taken him here and he had decided that another trip later would only waste time. He automatically moved to a section set apart from the other books, gaze skipping over the rows of distinctive orange spines, before coming to rest on the plain brown covering of the book he was looking for. The shop owner blinked down in some puzzlement as Haruki brought the book over to the counter to pay. She had watched the jounin head over to the special section set aside for the legendary Sanin's books, but most who wandered over there came back with at least a few volumes of Icha Icha. She shrugged mentally and quickly accepted the money that the handsome reed held out. Oh well. The less perverts in Konoha the better. Thank you and please come again. Haruki nodded his thanks and headed for the door, tale of the utterly gutsy shinobi tucked under one arm. He had read it numerous times already, but the book was still his favorite read. XXX. Haruki's next stop was a clothing store for ninja, and he immediately headed over to the coat section, scanning the trench coats on display with a critical eye. His old coat had been made by Shizune as a gift for becoming Anbu General. He had loved the short-sleeved, open-collared chakra-infused midnight blue coat with tongues of flames decorating the bottom edge, coupled with pockets on the outside for his hands and on the inside for storing weapons and poisons. He had worn it everywhere after Shizune had presented it to him, much to the woman's delight. The medic had admitted that she had based the design on his father's coat after hearing a description of it from Tsunade, but Haruki had been quick to assure her that he didn't mind. Unfortunately, said coat had been all but shredded barely halfway through his battle with Madara, and he had been forced to leave it behind. Iridi'd finally decided on a simple dark brown trench coat, lightweight and durable and similar in cutting to his old one. It would do for now, until he could perhaps convince the Shizune in this timeline to make the coat again. He just didn't feel right without a long overcoat thrown on over his uniform. XXX. Haruki's final stop for the day was, of course, the Hokage monument. Thinking back, he figured he had spent a good third of his time in Konoha, simply sitting on the edge of the mountain staring out across the village and beyond that. The view was always excellent from so high up, and he had done everything from drinking sake to napping, to doing absolutely nothing up here. Standing here now with his eyes closed and the wind weaving through his hair, Haruki could almost pretend that he was still in his own time, back before Konoha had fallen, and was simply waiting for Team 7, all of Team 7, to join him on one of those rare days when they were all free from their duties for a few hours. With a sigh, his eyes blinked open and he settled down into his usual spot on the Hokage monument, leaning against one of the spikes of the Yondame's hair. With his eyes open, everything was different. There were no foreboding dark clouds on the horizon like there had been throughout the entire war. The clouds made it seem as if the battlefield was an entirely different world. It could be as bright and sunny as any summer day could be, but the world darkened and the temperature dropped the moment one stepped onto the battlefield. And the village. It was almost sleepy. Lazy. Careless. The village he had come to recognize as his own had always had a certain tension and weariness weighing it down, as if Konoha itself had been tired with the war. Now though, in the distance, Haruki could make out the civilians talking easily with one another and a smattering of shinobi exchanging easy conversation, happy and ignorant of all the things that would eventually lead this village to its doom. But that was what he was here for. The future was his burden to bear. His duty was to give these people a chance to live out their lives on their terms. And this time, he would not fail. XXX. Sunrise saw Haruki slipping out of the village unseen, hair tied back and brown coat flapping behind him as he ran through the forests of his home country. He never had much opportunity to just let loose and run to his heart's content anymore, but if he kept up his speed, he could run straight out of Hai no Kuni and right through Yu no Kuni and Shimo no Kuni before hitching a ride with Kurama to reach his destination in the promised day and a half. XXX. Hokage-sama. Sarutobi glanced up at the formal address as his two counselors filed into his office. Homura, Kaharu, he acknowledged. What can I do for you? Word has reached Konoha of a sudden explosion of chakra in Kumogakure, Kaharu began stiffly. And there have been sightings of someone who appears to be Hyuga Hiashi in Yu no Kuni and Shimo no Kuni. We wish to know if you have received any information on the recent events. Sarutobi hid a satisfied smile and frowned thoughtfully instead. I have spoken to Hiashi-san, but he too has expressed his lack of knowledge on the matter. I have also checked over the recent missions, but we have not had many requests from either of those countries and no Hyuga has been sent on the ones that have come to us. Both of his old teammates frowned and Homura took over for the two. Yet there must be some sort of connection. The rumors that have leaked back to us were very clear that the man that was sighted has Byakugan eyes. Sarutobi mentally congratulated Haruki on a job well done, making a note to have the man's pair ready for him upon his return. Before he could come up with a reply though, rapid light footsteps reached their ears and all three of them turned to face the open doorway as a Chunin skidded to a stop just outside the office. Hokage-sama. The Chunin sketched a hasty bow in the general direction of all three shinobi in the office before focusing on Sarutobi. Sir, a man, definitely a Hyuga, just appeared at the gates. He claims to be Hyuga Hisashi. Sarutobi forced a look of surprise on his face as he watched his counselors stiffen with shock. Before either could say anything, Sarutobi quickly rose to his feet. You are certain he said Hisashi? The Chunin nodded. Yes sir, the Jounin at the gates asked several times. Sarutobi nodded curtly. I will go myself. Please go to the Hyuga compound and inform Hiashi-san of this development. The Chunin shook his head. Hiashi-sama is already there, Hokage-sama. I believe he sensed the man's chakra signal and went to verify it himself. Sarutobi came out from behind his desk. Then I think I will join him. Homura. Kaharu. Both counselors nodded grimly and all three shinobi swept out of the Hokage tower, the Chunin leading the way. As they passed one of the open windows in the hallway, Sarutobi instinctively glanced outside, just in time to catch a familiar flash of crimson disappearing over one of the nearby rooftops. XXX. This is a surprising turn of events indeed, Hokage-sama. Why was the council not informed of such a significant development? Once Hyuga Hisashi had been confirmed as Hyuga Hisashi through 2 blood tests, a verification of his chakra signal, curse seal, and Byakugan, and a somewhat lengthy interrogation that Hiashi adamantly insisted on performing, the council, the clan and civilian representatives, Danzo, the newly returned Hisashi, the Hokage, and Haruki, had all assembled in the council chamber. Sarutobi hadn't wasted any time and had immediately launched into the heavily edited version of what had really happened, introducing Haruki and explaining his part in the discovery and resulting retrieval of the Hyuga clan head's brother. Haruki had stood at his shoulder, face about as helpful as a stone wall, when the other occupants in the room all tried to gauge the Redeed's reactions throughout Sarutobi's explanation. Currently, Hamura was staring frostily at Haruki, even as he directed his question at Sarutobi, but it was Hiashi who answered, rising from his seat amongst the clan heads. This was a problem for the Hyuga clan to deal with, Hiashi stated coolly, wide eyes surveying the room. When Kazama-san returned with news of my brother, I requested that this matter be dealt with quietly and discreetly. It could cause a potential war with Kumogakure if a spy was discovered to have been in their territory, and by handling this issue as we have, Kumo cannot claim ignorance of my brother's survival, his gaze hardened here. As they did on the attempted kidnapping of my eldest daughter 9 years ago. A quiet murmur spread across the room, and Sarutobi watched Inoichi and Chaoza nod in acceptance of this justification, while Shikaku remained still in his seat, a calculating glint in his eyes, as his attention remained on the Redeed standing behind Sarutobi. He said nothing though, and the Sandaime let his gaze move on to the other occupants of the room. The civilian representative was frowning heavily, occasionally glancing at Danzo further back in the room. Danzo remained expressionless, seemingly weighing Hiashi's words as Hamura and Kaharu exchanged a few words between themselves. Very well, Hiashi-sama, Kaharu accepted grudgingly, nodding at Hiashi as the man sat down again. This issue seems to have been handled quite efficiently. We will now be able to demand compensation from Kumo's rakeage, which will be quite beneficial for Konoha. And wonderfully executed, Kazama-san, Inoichi added, blue-green eyes on the jounin at Sarutobi's side. Haruki dipped his head in acknowledgement. Thank you, Inoichi-sama, but credit must also go to Hokage-sama and Hiashi-sama, as well as Hisashi-sama. I simply followed their plan as instructed. Sarutobi remained neutral on the outside, but he felt a thrum of worry inside. The plan was undoubtedly suggested by Haruki. For the future Hokage to downplay his skill as a strategist, Sarutobi knew the Redeed wanted to remain unnoticed for as long as possible. And to blatantly lie in front of the council, the Sandaime wondered just how dangerous Danzo was to make Haruki this cautious. Of course, Chaoza nodded from next to Inoichi, even as Shikaku cocked his head and the interest on his face went up another notch. It was here though that Danzo finally spoke up, shifting forward to stare intently at Sarutobi. I do wonder though, Hokage-sama, where this Kazama-sen came from. I have never seen his face before, nor do I recall sending any jounin to Kumo for infiltration. Sarutobi didn't even blink. I destroyed all his files, down to his academy records before sending him to Kumo as a spy. If he had been caught and traced back to Konoha, Kumo could demand much worse from us. And I do not remember needing to inform anyone before sending out any of my shinobi on a mission. The reprimand was subtle but sharp, and Danzo reluctantly backed down, inclining his head as he settled back in his seat. There was a slightly tense silence as Sarutobi glanced around the room before speaking again. Then for now, this matter is closed. I will send a courier to Kumogakure to request a meeting with the Raikage, but everything we have discussed here obviously cannot be leaked out. Concurrent nods responded this statement and Sarutobi continued. Then this meeting is adjourned. As everyone rose and bowed to the Hokage before making their way to the doors, Sarutobi glanced over his shoulder at the impassive Redeed. Get some rest, Haruki-kun, he said softly. You've done very well. Come by the office tomorrow and I'll have your paycheck ready. Haruki blinked, his neutral features never shifting as he sketched a slight bow before heading to the door as well. He waited patiently for the others to file out first, never missing the drilling stare from across the room where Danzo still stayed seated, before making his own way out of the Hokage tower. His shoulders relaxed slightly as he stepped outside, but stiffened again when he felt a somewhat familiar presence approach him. Haruki-san. Haruki turned to face Shikaku, maintaining an iron control on his expression as he gazed back at the scarred features of one of his future best friend's father. He had gotten to know this man in his own timeline, spending hours at a time crouched over battle plans with him and his son. The Jounin commander had an odd crooked smile on his face. The one Haruki had come to recognize as one that Shikaku always wore when he had discovered something particularly interesting. At the moment, it was an unnerving expression for Haruki. May I help you, Shikaku-sama? He asked politely, remembering the correct honorific for the strategist. Shikaku only waved a lazy hand in the air before tucking it back into his deerskin coat again. Shikaku is fine. And perhaps you could. Intelligent dark eyes sharpened as the smile widened fractionally. How would you like to play a game of shogi with me? What if Naruto is a war veteran time travel? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.